The December cold bit at Adrian Chen's face as he stepped out of his car, the metallic grey luxury vehicle gleaming under the soft glow of the mansion's exterior lights. Snow was beginning to fall, light, delicate flakes that disappeared against the warm pavement. He stood there for a moment, his black cashmere coat catching the wind, watching the snowflakes drift past the ornate windows of his home. Something felt wrong. Adrian had been driving for 2 hours straight from a business meeting that ran longer than expected, and all he wanted was peace. Maybe a drink. Maybe just silence. But as he looked at the mansion before him, the place he'd built with his own hands, with money earned through means he'd rather not think about these days, he felt a strange shift in his chest. The house was too bright. On a Wednesday night at 8:45 p.m., when his wife Isabella had specifically told him she'd be at a charity gala until after midnight, every light in the mansion seemed to be on. Not just on, but alive. Warm. The kind of brightness that suggested movement, presence, celebration. Adrian frowned. He'd been in this business long enough to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that something was off. He stood motionless for another moment, his mind running through possibilities. Maybe Isabella had come home early. Maybe she'd changed her plans. Maybe the household staff had left the lights on while cleaning. Then he heard it. Through the partially open window of what he knew was his bedroom, the bedroom he hadn't shared with his wife in over a year, came a sound that made his entire body go still. Laughter. His wife's laughter. But it wasn't the polite, practiced laugh he'd heard at countless dinner parties and social events. This was different. This was breathless. Intimate. The kind of laugh that came from deep in someone's chest when they were completely, unguardedly happy. And underneath it, another voice. A man's voice. Adrian's jaw clenched so hard he felt his teeth grind together. He knew that voice. He'd known it his entire adult life. It belonged to someone he'd trusted, someone he'd built an empire with. His cousin. Without thinking, Adrian's hand moved instinctively toward the gun he kept at his hip. His body went into autopilot, the kind of autopilot that came from years of dealing with betrayal and disloyalty in his world. His foot took a step toward the servant's entrance. Then another. His mind was already planning, already calculating, already deciding what he would do to the two people who were clearly in his bed. But then he heard something else. A soft sound. Footsteps. Careful, measured footsteps coming from the shadows near the servant's entrance of the mansion. Adrian's hand froze halfway to his weapon. His eyes, sharp and trained from years of survival, snapped toward the movement. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was a young woman. Mid-20s, maybe younger. She wore the black and white uniform of household staff, the kind of uniform that marked her as invisible in spaces like this, the kind of uniform that meant people looked through her rather than at her. Her skin was rich and dark, and even in the dim light of the December evening, Adrian could see her eyes. They were wide. Terrified. But underneath the terror, there was something else. Something that looked like determination. "Be quiet," she whispered, her voice urgent and low. "Please. You have to be quiet." Adrian stared at her. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time in his entire life, he found himself hesitating. This young woman, this invisible maid, was reaching out and grabbing his arm. Her touch was light but firm, and she was pulling him, gently but insistently, away from the entrance to the house. "Who are you?" Adrian demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing?" "There's no time," she said, still pulling him. "Please. Just come with me. I know what you heard. I know what you're thinking. But if you go in there now, everything will fall apart. You have to trust me." Adrian Chen didn't trust people. That was a rule he lived by. Trust was a luxury for people who didn't run criminal organizations. Trust was something his father had beaten out of him when he was just a kid, teaching him that the world was full of wolves and he had to be the biggest, most dangerous wolf in the pack. But something about the conviction in this young woman's voice, something about the way her entire body was shaking even as she held her ground, made him stop. He let her pull him deeper into the shadows. They moved away from the house, away from the windows where his wife's laughter still drifted into the night air. The snow crunched softly beneath their feet as they walked toward the side garden, where the shadows were thicker and the winter darkness seemed to swallow sound. Adrian followed, not because he trusted her, he didn't. But because his instincts, the same ones that had warned him something was wrong with the house, were now telling him something else entirely. This woman knew something. They reached the garden, and Adrian finally pulled his arm free from her grasp. He turned to face her fully, and even in the darkness, she didn't look away. There was fear in her eyes, real fear, but there was also something that looked like courage. The kind of courage that didn't make sense for someone in her position, someone who was just a maid, someone who should be terrified of being alone in a dark garden with a man like him. "Talk," Adrian commanded. His voice was low and deadly, the voice that made grown men tremble. "And it better be good, or you're fired for even touching me." The girl swallowed hard. Adrian could see her throat move in the dim light. She was gathering her courage, marshalling her thoughts. It was clear she'd been preparing for this moment, rehearsing it in her head over and over again. But now that it was actually happening, the words seemed to be stuck somewhere in her throat. She looked up at him. Really looked at him, meeting his eyes directly even though everything about the situation should have made her look away. "My name is Sophia," she said quietly. Her accent was subtle but present, marking her as not from here, not from this world of wealth and power. "I work in your home. I've worked here for 7 months now." Adrian said nothing. He waited. "Your wife," Sophia continued, her voice steady now, "she's not just cheating on you, sir. She's planning to kill you." The words hung in the frozen air between them like a death sentence. Adrian's expression didn't change. He'd learned a long time ago how to keep his face blank, how to hide his reactions. But inside, something shifted. Something broke. He stared at Sophia in silence. And then, slowly, he reached out and gestured for her to continue. "Everything," he asked quietly. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." Sophia nodded. And as the snow continued to fall around them, she began to tell Adrian Chen a story that would change his entire life. Adrian stands in his garden, listening to a young woman he's never really noticed before, learning that the two people he trusted most in the world have been conspiring to take his life. The shock is settling in, the rage is building, but something else is happening too. He's listening. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian Chen, a man who makes decisions in seconds, who shoots first and asks questions never, is choosing to listen. He's choosing to trust his instincts about this girl instead of acting on his instincts about his wife. And that choice, that single moment of choosing to listen instead of choosing to act, is about to set everything in motion. This is the moment where everything changes. Adrian came home expecting an ordinary night. Instead, he found betrayal. But the betrayal alone wouldn't have changed him. What changes him is that he's stopped. He's listened. And he's about to discover that salvation sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Sophia, a woman who by every measure should keep her head down and survive, is instead risking everything to tell the truth. She's risking her job, her visa, her entire future in this country, because she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent. That's the kind of courage that changes people. There's something beautiful happening in this darkness, in this cold garden on a December night. Adrian is learning what it feels like to be saved. Not by someone powerful, not by someone he respects, but by someone invisible. Someone he's probably passed 100 times without really seeing her. Someone whose name he definitely didn't know until 30 seconds ago. And Sophia is learning what it feels like to stand up for what's right, even when you have everything to lose. In this moment, in this dark garden, two people from completely different worlds are about to become bound together by something stronger than class, stronger than position, stronger than fear. They're bound together by the truth. Friends, if you've made it this far into Adrian and Sophia's story, I need you to do me a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. I know what you're thinking, you want to know what happens next. You want to know what Sophia is about to tell Adrian. You want to understand how someone plans to murder their own husband, and more importantly, you want to see how Adrian is going to respond. But here's the thing, what's about to happen next will shake you to your core. It's going to make your heart race. It's going to make you angry. And it's going to make you believe, once and for all, that love really can find us in the most unexpected places. So please, subscribe to this channel right now. Don't just watch this video and move on. This is the kind of story you're going to want to share with everyone you know. The kind of story that reminds us that courage comes in unexpected packages. That betrayal, while devastating, can sometimes lead us exactly where we need to be. Adrian and Sophia's journey is just beginning, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on Sophia's shoulders and in her dark hair. She and Adrian had moved deeper into the garden, away from the house, away from any chance that someone might see them through a window or hear them through an open door. Each step they took was measured, careful. Adrian's mind was racing, but his body remained controlled. After all these years in his world, he'd learned to separate his emotions from his actions. Sophia, on the other hand, was trembling. Adrian noticed everything. He noticed the way her hands were shaking slightly at her sides. He noticed the way she kept opening her mouth to speak and then closing it again, as if the words kept getting stuck somewhere between her brain and her lips. He noticed the way she glanced back toward the house every few seconds, as if worried that Isabella or Marcus would suddenly appear and catch them together. "Talk," Adrian said again, his voice harder this time. "And don't leave anything out. I want to know everything." Sophia took a breath. The kind of breath that came from deep in your belly, the kind that gave you courage when you had none. Adrian could see her gathering herself, collecting the pieces of her bravery and putting them back together. 2 weeks ago, Sophia began, her voice quiet but steady, "I was cleaning the upstairs study. The one your wife keeps locked all the time." Adrian's eyes narrowed. The study was locked. "Yes," Sophia said. "But I found a spare key. One of the maintenance workers showed me. He said in a house this big, there are always keys hidden in places people forget about. Places in the walls, behind pictures, under baseboards." She paused. "I wasn't trying to snoop, Mr. Chen. I was just trying to do my job. But when I unlocked that door, I heard voices." "From inside the study?" Adrian asked. Sophia shook her head. "From the next room. Your wife's bedroom. The walls are thick, but the old heating vents, they carry sound. Like whispers traveling through the building. I heard everything." Adrian waited. He was good at waiting. Patient. The kind of patient that came from knowing that the person in front of you would eventually tell you what you needed to know. "Your wife was talking to a man," Sophia continued. "And the man was..." She hesitated, as if the words themselves were dangerous. "It was your cousin. Marcus." I recognized his voice. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something shifted inside him. A tightening. A coldness. Marcus. His cousin. His right hand. The man he'd trusted more than anyone else in this world. "What were they saying?" Adrian asked quietly. Sophia pulled her coat tighter around herself. The snow was beginning to stick to her eyelashes, making her blink frequently. She looked impossibly young in this moment, impossibly vulnerable. But there was steel in her voice when she spoke. "They were talking about you, Mr. Chen. About killing you." The words landed like a physical blow, even though Adrian had already suspected something like this. Hearing it said aloud was different. It was real in a way that suspicion could never be. Isabella said. Sophia closed her eyes briefly, as if she was replaying the conversation in her mind. She said, 3 more weeks. The insurance policy updates on January 1st, double indemnity. 50 million. And then we can finally be together without hiding. Adrian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. $50 million. Enough to start a new life. Enough to disappear somewhere and never come back. Enough to make the risk worth it. Marcus asked her if she was sure the plan would work. Sophia continued. He said something like, "Your husband isn't stupid, Hannah. He's survived assassination attempts from rival gangs. What makes you think this will work?" And Isabella, she laughed. She actually laughed, Mr. Chen. Like it was funny. Adrian waited. She said, "Because he trusts me. He doesn't love me. He hasn't touched me in over a year, but he trusts me. And that's his weakness. That's what she said. That trust was his weakness. Adrian felt something crack open inside his chest. He'd married Isabella because his mother had asked him to, in her final days. She'd been sick, dying, and she'd wanted him to have someone. Someone to keep him from being completely alone in this dark world he inhabited. He hadn't loved Isabella, not really. But he had respected her. He had been faithful to her, even when she'd moved to a separate bedroom. Even when years had passed without them being close. He had trusted her. How? Adrian asked. His voice was barely a whisper now. How are they planning to do it? Sophia swallowed hard. Christmas Eve. During the family gathering. Isabella is going to put something in your whiskey. Something called antifreeze. She said it would look like a heart attack. The family doctor is already paid off. He'll sign whatever paperwork needs to be signed. Marcus will be upstairs, away from the main party. That's his alibi. Then he'll help carry your body to the bedroom. Make it look like you collapsed there. By the time anyone realizes what's really happened, Marcus will be on a plane to Japan. Adrian's mind was working now, processing information at lightning speed, calculating angles and outcomes. The amount of planning. The amount of coordination. The fact that they'd already paid off a doctor, which meant there were other people involved, other people who knew about the plan. How long? Adrian asked. How long has this been going on? The affair. The plan. She said Marcus has been waiting 2 years, Sophia said. But the affair started about 18 months ago, I think. That's what they were talking about. They've had a lot of time to plan this. Adrian nodded slowly. 2 years. 2 years of his cousin lying to his face. 2 years of his wife sleeping next to him, or in the room next to him, planning his death. 2 years of them building this conspiracy while he went about his business, unaware. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Adrian asked suddenly. You've known this for 2 weeks. Why didn't you just tell me the first day you heard them? Sophia looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes that made Adrian pause. It wasn't just fear anymore. There was something else. Something that looked like judgment. Like she was measuring him somehow. Because I needed proof, she said quietly. And because I needed to know if you were worth saving. Adrian stared at her. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Not in his entire adult life. People were afraid of him. People respected him. People obeyed him. But no one had ever looked him in the eye and essentially told him that they had to evaluate whether he was worth the risk. I watched you, Sophia continued. She was speaking more confidently now, as if she'd crossed some invisible line and found solid ground on the other side. For the past 2 weeks, I watched you. I learned things about you by watching. What kind of things? Adrian asked. I saw how you donated $50,000 to the children's hospital under a fake name. The nurses didn't know it was you, but I found the paperwork in your office when I was cleaning. I saw how you paid for your driver's daughter's wedding when he was too proud to ask for help. I saw the bills. I saw his reaction when he realized what you'd done. Sophia's voice was steady now, sure. And I saw how every Sunday, no matter what, no matter how tired you are, you visit your mother's grave. Even when you've been up all night, even when you have important meetings, you go to that cemetery. You spend an hour there, and then you come back. Adrian felt something shift inside him. Something he couldn't name. So I needed to know, Sophia said softly, if that man, the man who does those things, the man who your mother clearly raised to understand the difference between right and wrong, if that man was worth saving. And the answer is yes. Yes, Mr. Chen, I think you're worth saving. Adrian looked at this young woman, this housemaid he'd probably passed 100 times without really seeing her, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Respect. Real respect. Not the kind that came from fear or power, but the kind that came from recognizing someone who had courage. Real courage. Your wife, Sophia said, she thinks I'm nobody. She thinks because I'm an immigrant, because I'm just a maid, that no one would believe me. She said something about me being deported before I could even finish making an accusation. She thinks I'm invisible. That I don't matter. Adrian said nothing. But I matter enough to decide whether you live or die, Sophia said. I matter enough to know the truth. And I matter enough to choose to tell you, even though it terrifies me. Even though I know it might cost me everything. Adrian reached out and put his hand on Sophia's shoulder. Just for a moment. Just to anchor both of them to this moment, to this truth that was now out in the open between them. Thank you, he said simply. Then he pulled out his phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart. Vincent Wu answered on the second ring, the way he always did, the way a man answers when he's trained his whole life to be ready for emergencies. Boss. Vincent's voice was alert, awake, even though it was late at night. What's wrong? I need you at my location, Adrian said quietly. Bring the team. And bring recording equipment. Professional grade. The kind that captures audio and video with crystal clarity. How long? Vincent asked. As fast as you can. 20 minutes. Maybe less. Adrian ended the call and looked at Sophia. What I'm about to do, he said, will change everything. For all of us. For you especially. I need to know, are you ready for that? Sophia nodded. I've been ready since the moment I decided to tell you the truth. Adrian studied her face. In the moonlight, with the snow falling around them, she looked impossibly young and impossibly brave. He thought about what she'd said, that she'd watched him for 2 weeks and decided whether he was worth saving. That she'd risked her job, her visa, her entire future in this country, because she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent. What's your name again? Adrian asked. Sophia. Sophia Reyes. I'm from Colombia originally. But I've been living here for 4 years. Adrian nodded. He would remember that name. He would remember this moment. He would remember this young woman who'd pulled him into the darkness and told him the truth about the people he'd trusted most. I'm going to catch a snake, Adrian said quietly, looking back toward the house. And I want evidence before I do. When Vincent arrives, we're going to record everything. Every conversation they have. Every moment they incriminate themselves further. And then we're going to use that evidence to ensure they both pay for what they've done. Sophia nodded. She understood what he was saying, even though he hadn't spelled it all out. This wasn't going to be a quiet divorce. This wasn't going to be a private family matter. This was going to be a legal matter. A criminal matter. Isabella and Marcus would be arrested. They would go to trial. They would face justice through the system, not through Adrian's world. It was a different kind of justice than Adrian was used to. But looking at Sophia's face, seeing the relief there, the quiet gratitude, Adrian realized something. Maybe different was better. Maybe it was time for him to become a different kind of man. But first, he had to catch a snake. And he had to do it right. Adrian now knows the truth. Isabella and Marcus are planning to kill him on Christmas Eve. They've been planning it for a long time. They've involved other people, a doctor, possibly others. And they've convinced themselves that they're going to get away with it. But Adrian is 3 steps ahead of them now. And Sophia, this invisible housemaid, has just become the most important person in Adrian's life. Not because he loves her. Not because he's grateful in a romantic way. But because she's shown him something he forgot he was capable of being, someone worth fighting for. Sophia came to Adrian with nothing but the truth and her conviction that he was worth saving. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't negotiate. She didn't try to protect herself first. She made a choice. That choice is going to ripple through both of their lives in ways neither of them can fully understand yet. But in this moment, they both feel it. They both know that something fundamental has shifted. Adrian is no longer alone. And Sophia is no longer invisible. Here's what's really happening in this dark garden, in the snow, late on a December night. 2 people who should have no reason to trust each other are beginning to trust. One is doing it because the other proved they had courage. One is doing it because the other proved they had integrity. And that trust, that connection, is going to be tested again and again over the coming days. But right now, in this moment, it's enough. It's enough to change the course of both their lives. If you just felt your heart break for Adrian, Please hit that like button right now. I'm serious. Because what we just watched was more than a betrayal. What we just watched was a moment where one person's courage became another person's salvation. Sophia risked everything to tell the truth. And Adrian, a man who could have ended this with violence, chose instead to choose the path of justice. But here's the thing, this is just the beginning. Share this video with someone you love. And come back with us as Adrian and Sophia prepare to take down everyone who tried to destroy him. Because this is the kind of story that changes you. This is the kind of story that reminds you that courage comes in unexpected packages. And this is the kind of story that proves love and loyalty and doing what's right can be more powerful than anything else. Vincent Wu arrived in exactly 17 minutes. Adrian watched from the shadows of the study as his most trusted associate pulled up to the servants' entrance in an unmarked black van. Vincent was a man of few words and efficient actions, exactly the kind of person Adrian needed right now. Behind him came 3 other men, each one handpicked from Adrian's inner circle. Men he'd worked with for years. Men he knew would ask no questions and execute whatever plan Adrian laid out in front of them. They moved through the house like ghosts. Adrian met them in the study, closing the heavy oak door behind them. The study was his sanctuary: dark wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive desk that had belonged to his father. It was a place where Adrian felt most in control, most himself. And right now, he needed to feel in control because everything else in his world was spinning. "Boss," Vincent said, nodding respectfully. "What's the situation?" Adrian poured himself a glass of whiskey and then set it down untouched. He looked at the amber liquid for a long moment, thinking about how Sophia had heard his wife plotting to poison him with antifreeze. How he could never look at a drink the same way again. "My wife and my cousin are planning to kill me," Adrian said simply. "On Christmas Eve. They've been planning it for months. We're going to gather evidence, and then we're going to let them walk right into a trap." The men exchanged glances but said nothing. This was Adrian's world. Betrayal was not a shock. Death was not a shock. The only shock would have been if Adrian let them get away with it. Adrian laid out the plan. They would install hidden cameras in the master bedroom and common areas throughout the house. They would record audio of every conversation between Isabella and Marcus. They would document the evidence of embezzlement, the bribed staff members, the purchased antifreeze. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, Adrian would have everything he needed to ensure that Isabella and Marcus faced justice, real justice, the kind that came through the legal system, not through violence. "We move tonight," Adrian told them. "While they're sleeping. The cameras go in without them knowing. The audio equipment goes in places they'll never think to look. And we record everything from this moment until Christmas Eve. 4 days. One of the men said quietly. "We have 4 days." 4 days is enough, Adrian replied. The next morning, Adrian woke up alone, as always, in the guest bedroom. He hadn't slept in the master bedroom with Isabella in over a year. He'd told her it was because of his work schedule, because he came home late and didn't want to disturb her sleep. The truth was simpler than that. He didn't love her. He didn't want to touch her. And somewhere deep down, maybe he'd always known she wasn't the person he thought she was. He showered, dressed in a sharp dark suit, and made his way downstairs for breakfast. Isabella was already in the dining room, looking beautiful and polished as always, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled when he walked in. "Good morning, darling," she said, her voice warm and affectionate. The same voice she used with everyone. The same voice that was a complete lie. Adrian sat down across from her. "Good morning. Sleep well?" "Like a baby," Isabella said, her smile widening. "I was actually hoping we could talk about my plans for Christmas Eve. I'm thinking a big family gathering. Something really special." Adrian could feel his jaw tightening, but he kept his face neutral. "That sounds nice. Tell me about it." As Isabella described her plans, the guest list, the menu, the decorations, Adrian realized how good she was at lying. How natural it was for her. She talked about family traditions and honoring his mother's memory, and none of it was real. Every word was calculated. Every smile was a performance. And somewhere in the house, Sophia was watching him, aware of the truth he now carried. "She's setting up the perfect scenario," Sophia said quietly. It was late at night, almost midnight. Adrian's team had finished installing all the recording equipment, and now Adrian and Sophia sat alone in the study, reviewing the footage from the day. Sophia had come to the study at Adrian's request. He'd told her they needed to discuss security measures for the household, which was partially true. But mostly, he'd wanted to see her. To talk to her. To be around someone who knew the truth and didn't look at him with lies in their eyes. Sophia was showing him footage from the kitchen, where Isabella had been planning Christmas Eve with the caterers. Every detail was designed to seem innocent and festive. Every detail was actually part of a murder plot. "She wants everything to look perfect," Sophia continued. "So when you die, no one will suspect anything. It'll just look like a tragedy. A man who worked too hard, didn't exercise enough, had a heart attack at his own family dinner." Adrian nodded slowly. He'd had 4 days now to process the betrayal. 4 days of watching his wife and his cousin on hidden cameras, seeing them together, hearing their conversations. The shock had worn off. What remained was a cold, calculated anger. The kind of anger that came with focus. With purpose. "How are you holding up?" Sophia asked quietly. Adrian looked at her. She was sitting in one of the leather chairs across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She was still wearing her housemaid uniform, even though it was midnight. She'd been working all day, cleaning, serving, pretending that nothing was wrong while carrying the weight of this enormous secret. "I'm managing," Adrian said. "What about you?" "This is a lot." Sophia shrugged. "I didn't grow up with much, Mr. Chen. My mother, she raised me and my 3 siblings on her own in Lagos. She worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and in school. She used to tell us that the choices we make define who we are. That staying silent when you see something wrong makes you complicit in the wrong." Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Is that why you told me? Because of what your mother taught you?" "Partly," Sophia said. She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But also because I watched you. For 4 months before I heard Isabella and Marcus, I watched you. I see things other people don't, Mr. Chen. People think maids are invisible, so they talk and act like we're not there. I see a lot." "What did you see?" Adrian asked. Sophia stood up and walked over to the massive bookshelves that lined the study wall. She ran her finger along the spines of the books: history, philosophy, business texts. "I saw a man who gives away money to people who need it, even though he doesn't think anyone knows. I saw a man who visits a cemetery every single Sunday, no matter what. I saw a man whose eyes are sad even when he's smiling." She turned back to face him. "I saw a man who deserved better than what he was getting." Adrian felt something shift in his chest. Something breaking open that he'd kept locked tight for years. "Your mother," he said quietly. "Is she still alive?" Sophia's expression changed. Her eyes went soft, but also distant. "She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. I was at university here, and I couldn't afford to go home. I was on a video call with her when she—" Sophia's voice trailed off. She didn't finish the sentence. Adrian understood. You didn't have to finish sentences like that. The meaning was already understood. "I'm sorry," Adrian said simply. Sophia nodded. She walked back over and sat down in the chair across from him again. "After she died, I thought about giving up. Going home to Lagos. Everything here was so hard, the visa issues, the language sometimes, the way people look at me like I'm not quite real. But then I remembered something she said to me. She said, 'Sophia, the world is going to tell you that your voice doesn't matter. That you're too young, too foreign, too poor, too much of nothing. And you're going to have a choice: you can believe them, or you can prove them wrong.'" Adrian listened. He wasn't used to people talking to him like this. Most people were afraid. Most people said what they thought he wanted to hear. Sophia was different. Sophia said what she actually thought. "So when I heard Isabella and Marcus planning to kill you," Sophia continued, "I had another choice. I could ignore it. I could stay invisible and safe. Or I could prove the world wrong about what my voice was worth. Adrian stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the Seoul skyline glittered in the darkness. Thousands of buildings, thousands of lives, thousands of stories happening simultaneously. And in this study, in this moment, his entire life was about to change because one young woman had decided her voice mattered. I didn't marry for love, Adrian said quietly, still looking out at the city. My mother was dying. She wanted me to have someone. Someone to keep me from being completely alone. Isabella seemed suitable. Beautiful, well-connected, from a good family. I thought that would be enough. He turned back to face Sophia. But it wasn't. Not even close. I realized months after we married that we didn't actually like each other. We just occupied the same space and pretended it was a life. Sophia said nothing. She just listened. My father, Adrian continued, he built an empire on violence and fear. He taught me that trust was weakness. That the only way to survive in this world was to be harder than everyone else, faster than everyone else, more ruthless than everyone else. And I learned those lessons well. Adrian paused. But my mother, she tried to teach me something different. Before she died, she told me that she hoped I would become a man worthy of being loved. Not feared. Loved. Adrian looked at Sophia directly. I haven't thought about that in years. But hearing you tonight, listening to you talk about your mother and moral responsibility and having a voice that matters, it reminded me that my mother was right. That maybe there's more to life than building an empire on fear. Sophia's eyes were glistening now, but she was smiling. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, Adrian said. I think she'd like you. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past few days hanging between them like something solid you could almost touch. We should get some rest, Sophia said finally, standing up. Tomorrow is another day of pretending. Adrian nodded. But as Sophia walked toward the door, he found himself saying her name. Sophia? She turned back. Yes. Thank you, Adrian said. Not just for telling me the truth about Isabella and Marcus. Thank you for reminding me who I want to be. Even before we stop them. Sophia smiled a real smile, not the practiced smile she used when she was serving dinner or cleaning rooms. You're welcome, Mr. Chen. After she left, Adrian sat alone in the study for a long time. He thought about his mother. He thought about Sophia's mother. He thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment where he had 4 days to prepare a trap for the two people who'd betrayed him most. But he also thought about something else. He thought about the way Sophia's eyes had looked when she talked about her mother. The way her voice had trembled slightly when she spoke about her convictions. The way she'd stood in his study in the middle of the night, not as an invisible housemaid, but as a woman with her own story, her own strength, her own worth. He couldn't think about that right now. Not with everything else happening. Not with Christmas Eve 4 days away. But he could file it away. He could acknowledge it. He could let it exist in the corner of his mind, waiting. Adrian has assembled his team. The cameras are installed. The recording equipment is in place. For the next 4 days, every moment Isabella and Marcus share will be captured. Every confession of love will be recorded. Every detail of their plan will be documented. But something else is happening too. Adrian and Sophia are beginning to trust each other. More than that, they're beginning to see each other. Really see each other. Not as a boss and a maid. Not as a man of power and an invisible servant. But as two people who've both lost, both hurt, and both understand what it means to want something better. The investigation is moving forward. But so is something neither of them expected. In the darkness of these past 4 days, Adrian has been reminded of something his mother taught him, that there's more to being a man than being powerful. There's more to being worthy than being feared. And Sophia, invisible Sophia, has learned that her voice does matter. That her convictions do mean something. That telling the truth, even when it's terrifying, can change someone's entire trajectory. They're not in love yet. Not even close. But they're beginning to understand each other in a way that most people never will. They're beginning to see the good in each other, even as the worst is about to be revealed. Here's what's really happening in Adrian's study, late at night, with the Seoul skyline glittering outside the windows. Two people who should have no reason to be close are becoming close. One is realizing that he doesn't have to be the man his father made him. One is realizing that her voice, her choices, her convictions matter. And neither of them can quite name what's happening between them. Not yet. But they both feel it. They both know that after Christmas Eve, nothing will ever be the same. Beautiful souls, if this made your heart feel something, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button. I'm asking because what's about to happen is going to shake you to your core. The next 3 days felt like living inside a lie. Sophia moved through the mansion like a ghost, performing her duties with mechanical precision. Breakfast at 7. The special blend of coffee that Isabella preferred. Fresh fruit arranged on the china plates that cost more than Sophia's monthly salary. Clean the dining room. Dust the sitting areas. Run the errands that Isabella needed run to the salon, to the florist, to the boutique where she picked out her Christmas Eve outfit. An emerald green dress, she'd chosen. Elegant. Sophisticated. The kind of dress a grieving widow would wear to her husband's funeral. Sophia watched Isabella try it on, watched her examine herself in the mirror and smile. That smile contained everything: the certainty of success, the contempt for the people around her, the casual cruelty of someone who thought they were untouchable. "What do you think, Sophia?" Isabella asked, turning to examine herself from another angle. "Do I look like a woman ready to start a new life?" Sophia's hands were gripping the feather duster so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She forced herself to breathe. Forced herself to respond in the quiet, submissive tone that Isabella expected from her. "You look beautiful," Sophia said. "Very elegant." Isabella smiled that cruel smile again. "I know. In 48 hours, I'll be free. Rich and free and finally able to live the life I was supposed to live. And you'll be deported back to wherever it is you came from." "Lagos? Is that where you're from?" "Colombia originally," Sophia said quietly. "But I went to university in Lagos before coming here." Isabella waved her hand dismissively. "Regardless. By next week, you won't even be a memory. Just another servant who came and went." Sophia left the room before she said something that would ruin everything. She went to the kitchen and stood alone for a moment, hands shaking, trying to gather herself. In the background, she could hear Isabella on the phone with Marcus, her voice low and excited as she confirmed their final plans. This was what hatred sounded like. Not loud and dramatic, but casual. Certain. Evil wrapped up in sophistication and emerald green silk. Adrian, meanwhile, was playing his role flawlessly. He came home at reasonable hours. He had dinner with Isabella, asking her about her day, listening to her talk about Christmas Eve preparations. He was attentive in the way a good husband should be. He gave no indication that anything was wrong. That he knew. That he'd been watching and recording for days. Late at night, after Isabella was asleep in her separate bedroom, Adrian worked with Vincent Wu and the team. They reviewed footage. They verified financial records. They tracked every movement of the antifreeze that was hidden in Marcus's apartment. They contacted the doctor and learned that yes, he'd been paid off, and yes, he was willing to sign whatever paperwork was needed. The evidence was overwhelming. Complete. Airtight. But as Adrian sat in his study at 3 in the morning on the night before Christmas Eve, looking at hours of recorded footage of his wife and cousin planning his death, he couldn't stop thinking about Sophia. He'd barely seen her in the past 3 days. By design, really, he didn't want Isabella or Marcus to suspect anything by noticing them together too much. But it was more than that. Adrian wasn't sure he could be in the same room with Sophia without revealing the truth that was becoming increasingly obvious to him. He was falling for her. It was insane. Completely illogical. She was a maid. He was a crime boss. She was from Colombia, he was Korean. The class difference alone should have made any kind of relationship impossible. And yet, every time he thought about her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The possibility that maybe, after tonight, he could be a different kind of man. A man worthy of being loved, not feared. A man worthy of someone like Sophia. At 4 a.m, Adrian gave up on sleep. He walked through the quiet mansion, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. He found himself walking toward the staff quarters, the small rooms where the household employees lived. Sophia's room was at the end of the hallway. Adrian stood outside her door for a long time, not knowing what he was doing, not knowing what he would say if he knocked. Finally, he did knock. Quietly. Carefully. It took a few moments, but the door opened. Sophia was there, still half asleep, wearing a simple grey t-shirt and sweatpants. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders, and Adrian realized he'd never seen her with her hair down before. It made her look younger, more vulnerable, more real. "Adrian," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "What's wrong? Has something happened?" "No," Adrian said quickly. "Nothing's wrong. I needed to talk to you. Can I come in?" Sophia glanced down the hallway to make sure no one was watching, then stepped aside to let him in. Her room was small but immaculate. A single bed, a desk, a small bookshelf with textbooks and novels. Everything was organized and clean, much like Sophia herself. "You should be resting," Sophia said quietly, closing the door behind him. "Tomorrow is going to be." "I know what tomorrow is," Adrian interrupted. "That's why I'm here. Sophia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." Sophia nodded, waiting. "Do you want out?" Adrian asked. "I can arrange it. A new visa. A new job somewhere far from here. Somewhere far from this world. You'd be protected. Provided for. You'd never have to worry about." "Do you want me to leave?" Sophia interrupted, stepping closer to him. Adrian felt his breath catch. "No," he said quietly. "No, I don't. But what I want and what's best for you might be different things," Adrian continued. He was being honest now, really honest, in a way he rarely was with anyone. "You have your whole life ahead of you. A life with possibilities. And I'm offering you to tie yourself to me, to this world, to all of this darkness. That's not fair to you." Sophia stepped even closer. They were standing very close now, close enough that Adrian could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean, nothing like the expensive perfumes Isabella wore. "Maybe I should decide what's best for me," Sophia said softly. Adrian's hand came up, his fingers ghosting along her jaw, barely touching but sending electricity through both of them. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, memorizing the exact shade of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, the courage that was written all over her face. "Sophia," he whispered. And then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was asking a question rather than demanding an answer. But Sophia answered by pulling him closer, her hands sliding up his chest, her lips parting, her entire body leaning into him. Adrian had kissed before. He'd had affairs, brief encounters, moments of physical connection. But nothing had ever felt like this. Nothing had ever felt so right. So honest. So real. His hand moved to the back of her head, tilting her slightly, deepening the kiss. He could feel her trembling against him, could feel the rapid beating of her heart matching his own. For just a moment, for just this brief space in time, neither of them was thinking about Isabella or Marcus or Christmas Eve or any of the darkness that surrounded them. They were just Adrian and Sophia, two people who'd found each other in the chaos and decided to hold on. But then Adrian's phone buzzed. It was a text from Vincent Wu, movement detected. Marcus arriving at Isabella's location. Beginning final preparations. Adrian pulled back, breaking the kiss, his forehead resting against Sophia's. They both breathed heavily, neither one wanting to let go. "That's Vincent," Adrian said quietly. "It's time." Sophia nodded, understanding. The moment was over. Reality was crashing back in. "After tonight," Adrian said, still holding her, still not wanting to let her go, "everything changes. For both of us. Are you ready?" Sophia pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "I've been ready since I first told you the truth. Are you?" Adrian kissed her forehead. Yes. I'm ready. The morning of Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. Isabella woke up energized, excited. She showered, styled her hair, did her makeup with meticulous care. Sophia helped her into the emerald green dress, zipping it up the back, watching in the mirror as her mistress's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Tonight is going to change everything, Isabella said, admiring herself. Adrian is going to die, I'm going to be the grieving widow, and in 6 months, Marcus and I will be somewhere beautiful, living the life we've always wanted. And you, Sophia, will be a distant memory. Sophia's hands were steady as she arranged Isabella's hair. Years of practice at hiding her feelings. Years of learning how to survive by keeping her emotions locked away. You look beautiful, Sophia said. The same words she'd said when Isabella tried on the dress. But this time, they meant something different. This time, they were a farewell to the person Isabella had been pretending to be. Down the hallway, Adrian was dressing in his own room. Vincent Wu helped him with his tie, checking in one final time. Everything is in place, Vincent said quietly. The recording equipment is all positioned. Detective Shin is standing by outside the house. When you give the signal, he'll be ready to move. This will be clean, boss. Legal. Justice, not revenge. Adrian nodded. He thought about his mother. About what she'd wanted for him. About the man he'd promised himself he would become. Thank you, Adrian said to Vincent. For everything. For believing in me when I needed it. Vincent smiled, a rare expression on his usually stoic face. I'd follow you anywhere, boss. Even into the light. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock. Adrian stood in the main hall of the mansion, greeting family members and trusted associates, playing the perfect host. Isabella moved through the room like a queen, charming everyone, completely at ease. She didn't know that in a few hours, her entire world would collapse. She didn't know that every moment was being recorded, that every word was being captured, that her betrayal was already documented and waiting to be revealed. Sophia moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne, invisible as always, watching and recording on the tiny camera that Vincent had pinned to her collar. She and Adrian had made eye contact exactly once, when he'd accepted a glass from her tray. That brief moment of connection had said everything that needed to be said. I'm here. I'm with you. We're going to see this through. The party was in full swing. Christmas music played. The massive Christmas tree in the main hall was decorated with thousands of lights. White flowers and ice sculptures adorned every surface. It was beautiful. It was festive. It was the perfect setting for the perfect crime, except that Adrian had stopped it before it could happen. At 9 o'clock, Isabella called for everyone's attention. She stood beneath the Christmas tree, elegant and composed, and began to speak about family traditions, about Adrian's mother, about the importance of coming together during the holidays. Her words were perfect. Her performance was flawless. And Adrian listened, his expression calm, his eyes cold with the knowledge of what she'd done. Sophia stood near the back of the room, her eyes moving between Isabella and Adrian, her hands steady despite the racing of her heart. Everything was about to change. Adrian and Sophia have crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. They've kissed. They've acknowledged what's been growing between them. And now they're about to face the final test of their trust in each other. The moment when everything they've been planning comes to fruition. Isabella stands beneath the Christmas tree, about to offer her husband a poisoned drink. She has no idea that her every move has been recorded. That her every word has been captured. That her entire plan has been documented in meticulous detail. And Adrian stands ready to stop her. But more than that, he stands ready to become the man his mother believed he could be. A man who chooses justice over revenge. A man who can love someone like Sophia, who saw his good heart even when he didn't see it himself. This is the calm before the storm. All the tension of the past 3 days. The weight of living 2 realities simultaneously, the burden of knowing what's coming, the undeniable pull between Adrian and Sophia, all of it is about to reach a crescendo. In just a few moments, everything will explode. But before that explosion, there's this moment. This moment where Isabella stands beneath the Christmas tree, so confident in her victory, so certain that her plan will work. She has no idea what's about to happen. And that's the thing about betrayal. The people who betray you are always so certain they'll get away with it. They're so confident in their own cleverness that they never see the trap until it's already sprung. This is where we see the full cost of the conspiracy. We see how Isabella's cruelty extends to her casual dismissal of Sophia. We see how Marcus is so caught up in his betrayal that he doesn't notice Adrian's careful observation. We see how the weight of this secret is affecting both Adrian and Sophia, pushing them closer together even as they try to maintain distance. And we see that Adrian is making a choice. A conscious choice. To become someone different. To honor his mother's memory by choosing justice over violence. To become worthy of someone like Sophia. The mansion had been transformed into something from a dream. White orchids and roses were arranged in crystal vases throughout the main hall. Twinkling lights draped across every wall, creating a soft, warm glow that made the entire space feel like it was underwater, suspended in some magical moment. Ice sculptures of swans and angels stood in strategic corners, their edges catching the light and throwing prisms across the polished marble floors. And in the center of it all stood the Christmas tree. 20 feet tall, decorated with thousands of lights that blinked in perfect synchronization, creating waves of illumination that made the entire room feel alive. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was the setting for a murder that would never happen. Guests began arriving at 7 o'clock, stepping out of luxury cars and into the winter night, dressed in their finest. Adrian's extended family, aunts and uncles who hadn't seen him in months. Business associates who owed him favors. Trusted advisors from his legitimate enterprises. Men and women who occupied the world between the legitimate and the criminal, the world Adrian had spent his entire adult life navigating. None of them suspected anything was wrong. In her room, Sophia dressed carefully. She pinned the small camera and microphone to her collar, the tiny button that would record everything that happened next. She looked at herself in the mirror and took a breath. In a few hours, everything would change. She would either witness justice being served, or she would witness Adrian's murder. There was no in-between. She pulled on her formal uniform, black and white, pristine and professional. She braided her hair back neatly. She became invisible again, the way she'd learned to do so well. Down the hallway, Adrian stood in front of the mirror in his study, knotting his tie with precise movements. His suit was sharp black, tailored, expensive. He looked every inch the powerful man that everyone believed him to be. But in his eyes, if you looked close enough, you could see something else. You could see a man at a crossroads, choosing which path to take. The path his father had shown him. Or the path his mother had hoped he would find. Vincent Wu knocked on the door quietly. "It's time, boss." Adrian nodded and turned to face him. "Is everything in place?" "Everything," Vincent confirmed. "Detective Shin is positioned outside. The recording equipment is ready. When you give the signal, we move. This ends tonight, and it ends right." Adrian thought about Sophia. About the kiss in her small room. About the way she'd looked at him when he'd told her he wasn't sure he deserved her. About how she'd stepped closer anyway, choosing him despite knowing exactly who and what he was. "Let's go," Adrian said. Isabella descended the grand staircase at 8:30, and the room seemed to shift. She wore a cream-colored dress. Elegant, sophisticated, perfectly tailored to her body. Diamonds caught the light at her throat and wrists. Her hair was styled in soft waves. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like the portrait of a sophisticated woman, a woman of taste and refinement. She looked like someone who was about to murder her husband. Sophia watched from her position near the catering table, camera recording everything. She watched as Isabella moved through the room, greeting guests with warmth and grace. The perfect hostess. The perfect wife. The perfect liar. Adrian arrived at 8:45, fashionably late, commanding attention simply by entering the room. He wore a dark suit that cost more than most people made in a year. His presence was magnetic, not because he demanded it, but because people simply gravitated toward him. They wanted his attention. They wanted his approval. He was the center of gravity in any room he occupied. When Adrian saw Isabella, he smiled. It was the smile of a man greeting his wife at a party. Pleasant. Polite. Completely devoid of any indication that he knew she was planning to kill him. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing her cheek. "Thank you, darling," Isabella replied. Her smile was radiant. "I'm so glad you could make it. I know how busy you are." If Adrian felt anything at the casual cruelty of her words, the implication that she expected him to be late, too busy with his criminal enterprise to attend his own family gathering, he didn't show it. "Wouldn't miss it," he said smoothly. "Your parties are always spectacular." He moved through the room, greeting family members, accepting congratulations on various business ventures, playing the role of the successful businessman perfectly. Sophia watched him from across the room, marveling at his control, at his ability to compartmentalize, to know what was coming and still function like a normal person. Marcus arrived at 8:55. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, and he moved through the room with the ease of someone who belonged there. He embraced Adrian when he saw him, and Adrian embraced him back, and Sophia felt her stomach twist at the betrayal of it. How could they touch each other? How could Marcus look Adrian in the eye knowing what he'd planned? But that was the thing about evil. Evil was very comfortable. Evil shook your hand and smiled at you and called you cousin. At 9 o'clock exactly, Isabella called for attention. The room quieted. The music faded. All eyes turned toward the Christmas tree, where Isabella stood, beautiful and composed, a glass of champagne in each hand. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, her voice carrying perfectly through the room. "Christmas has always been a special time for the Kim family. It's a time when we come together, when we celebrate the bonds of family and tradition. And it's a time when we remember those we've lost." She paused, and her eyes moved to Adrian's photo of his mother, a beautiful woman with kind eyes, hanging on the wall nearby. Adrian's mother, may she rest in peace, loved this season, Isabella continued. She believed in family. She believed in loyalty. She believed in coming together to celebrate what matters most. So tonight, I wanted to do something special. I wanted to toast to family, to tradition, and to the year ahead. A year that I hope will bring us all joy and blessings. It was the perfect speech. It hit all the right notes. It was designed to soften everyone in the room, to make them emotional, to make them remember why family mattered. And all the while, Isabella was holding a glass of poisoned champagne, waiting for the right moment to hand it to her husband. She gestured for Adrian to come forward. Adrian moved through the crowd, every eye on him. He climbed the 3 steps to the small platform where Isabella stood near the base of the Christmas tree. He accepted the glass from her hands, their fingers touching briefly. This was it. This was the moment where, in Isabella's mind, Adrian would drink the champagne and begin the process of dying. This was the moment where her plan would succeed. But Adrian didn't raise the glass to his lips. Instead, he turned to face the assembled crowd, the champagne glass held loosely in his hand. Isabella's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough that Sophia, watching from across the room with her heart in her throat, could see it. "Before we toast," Adrian said quietly, his voice cutting through the room like a knife, "I need to say something." The crowd murmured. Something was off. Something had changed in the energy of the room. "You talk about family," Adrian continued, looking directly at Isabella, "about tradition, about loyalty, about what my mother believed in." He paused. "Do you know what my mother believed in most?" Isabella's jaw was tight now. Her hand was shaking slightly. The other guests had gone very quiet, sensing that something was about to happen, though they had no idea what. "She believed," Adrian said, "that loyalty was the most important thing. That family was sacred. That betrayal was the worst sin of all. That traitors deserved no mercy." "Adrian, what are you?" Isabella began, but Adrian held up his hand. "What's in this glass?" he asked, holding it up to the light. "Champagne, obviously," Isabella said, her voice sharp now. The pretense was cracking. "Adrian, are you feeling well? Maybe you should sit down. You look young," Adrian said quietly. using Vincent Wu's nickname. Test it. Vincent stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the back of the room. He pulled out a small device, the kind used to test substances, and dipped a test strip into the champagne. Everyone watched in silence as the strip changed color. Not the clear result of harmless champagne. A color that indicated something else. Something deadly. When Vincent held up the strip, his face was grave. Ethylene glycol, he said quietly. Antifreeze. Enough to kill a man in 12 hours. The room erupted. Gasps. Shouts. Someone screamed. The guests began backing away from Isabella as if she'd suddenly become radioactive. She stood frozen on the platform, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. Adrian watched her face change, watched the moment when she realized that her plan hadn't worked, that she'd been caught, that everything was about to fall apart. "You're insane," Isabella hissed at Adrian. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but—" "No games," Adrian interrupted. His voice was cold now. Controlled. The voice of a man who'd made a decision and would follow through. Just truth. He nodded, and the wall behind the Christmas tree lit up. A projector screen descended from the ceiling, and suddenly the entire room was watching a video. Isabella and Marcus in bed. The room went completely silent. It wasn't graphic or explicit, Adrian had made sure of that. But it was undeniably them. Undeniably intimate. And the audio was playing, clear and damning. 3 more weeks, Isabella's recorded voice said. The insurance policy updates on January 1st, double indemnity. 50 million. And we can finally be together. You're sure the plan will work? Marcus's voice asked. Because he trusts me, Isabella replied. And that's his weakness. More footage played. More conversations. More confessions. The video showed financial records, proof of Marcus's embezzlement. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Insurance policy documents. And then, most damning of all, an interview with the doctor that Isabella had paid off, his face full of regret as he explained how much money he'd been offered to falsify Adrian's cause of death. Every moment was captured. Every betrayal was documented. Every detail of their plan was on display for everyone in the room to see. Isabella's face had gone from cream-colored to ash-gray. Marcus stood frozen, his hand still holding a champagne glass, his entire body trembling. Around the room, guests stared in shock, unable to process what they were witnessing. The video ended. The screen went dark. And in that darkness, Adrian's voice cut through the silence. "You were going to murder me," he said simply, looking at Isabella. "You were going to poison me, make it look like a heart attack, and take $50 million. And you thought no one would notice. You thought you were too clever, too beautiful, too well-connected. You thought that I was too busy with my empire to pay attention to my own wife." He turned to look at Marcus, and when he spoke, his voice cracked slightly. "And you, my cousin, my blood, the man I trusted with everything. I gave you the position at my right hand. I gave you access to everything. And you repaid that with betrayal." Isabella tried to speak, but Adrian raised his hand. "I'm not finished," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He pressed a button. Immediately, the doors to the main hall burst open, and Detective Shin entered with 4 uniformed police officers. The room descended into chaos again. "Kim Isabella and Park Marcus," Detective Shin said, his voice carrying authority, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and corruption of a public official. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Isabella tried to run. She actually tried to escape. But one of the officers caught her arm, and within moments, she and Marcus were both in handcuffs. Isabella was screaming that this was a mistake, that Adrian was lying, that she would sue him for everything. Marcus said nothing. He just stared at Adrian with an expression of shock and betrayal that mirrored what Adrian felt. As the officers led them toward the door, Isabella turned back one last time. "You'll regret this," she spat. "Both of you. I'll destroy you. I'll take everything you have. I'll..." But her words were cut off as the officers led her out of the mansion. Marcus followed, silent, broken, his eyes still on Adrian as he was led away. For a moment, there was complete silence in the room. Then, slowly, the guests began to applaud. It started with 1 or 2 people. Then more. And more. Until the entire room was applauding not for the arrest of the conspirators, but for Adrian. For his intelligence. For his strategy. For the way he'd handled a betrayal with precision and control rather than violence. Adrian stood beneath the Christmas tree, the poisoned champagne glass still in his hand, and received the applause of his family and associates. But his eyes weren't on them. His eyes were searching the room until they found Sophia, standing near the catering table, still invisible in her formal uniform, tears streaming down her face. He held her gaze for a long moment. A moment that said everything that needed to be said. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. I see you. You matter." Sophia nodded, just slightly, and smiled through her tears. The guests began to leave after that. Some lingered, wanting details, wanting to understand how Adrian had known. But eventually, they all departed, whispering to each other about what they'd witnessed. The scandal would spread through Seoul's underworld like wildfire. The beautiful socialite who'd tried to kill her crime boss husband. The cousin who'd betrayed his blood. The elaborate conspiracy that had unraveled in the middle of a Christmas Eve party. Adrian's reputation had just transformed into something different. Not the ruthlessness of his father, but the intelligence of a man who refused to be played. Who could execute justice with precision and control. The caterers cleaned up quietly. The Christmas tree lights continued to blink, no longer casting their glow over a party, but over an empty hall. The ice sculptures began to melt. The white flowers wilted in their vases. Adrian stood alone in the mansion, Vincent Wu having gone with Detective Shin to ensure the arrests went smoothly. The silence was deafening. The weight of what had happened was only now beginning to settle on him. He'd exposed the conspiracy. He'd called the police. He'd chosen justice over violence. He'd become the man his mother had wanted him to be. But Isabella was right about one thing: there would be consequences. There would be questions. There would be a trial. There would be fallout from the underworld associates who might see his choice to work with law enforcement as a betrayal of the code. Adrian didn't care. Because as he stood beneath the Christmas tree, alone in his mansion, he thought about his mother. About Sophia. About the man he was becoming. And for the first time in his adult life, that man felt like someone worth being. Everything. Adrian didn't drink the poisoned champagne. The trap worked perfectly. Isabella and Marcus are now in police custody, and the evidence against them is overwhelming. But more than that, Adrian has crossed a line. He's chosen the legal system over his criminal empire. He's proven that he can be intelligent and controlled without being violent. He's become someone new. This is what happens when someone chooses to be better. Isabella thought she could murder Adrian and get away with it. Marcus thought he could betray his cousin and disappear. Neither of them understood that Adrian had already made a choice, the choice to become worthy of being loved, not feared. And that choice changed everything. Sophia stood in that room and watched the plan unfold perfectly. She was there because she'd had the courage to tell the truth. She was there because she'd decided that Adrian was worth saving. And now, as Adrian stands in that empty mansion beneath that Christmas tree, he's thinking about her. He's thinking about how none of this would have happened without her. He's thinking about how love found him in the darkness, in the form of a housemaid who had the courage to speak up. The study was too quiet. Adrian stood alone, staring at nothing in particular. His expensive suit was still pristine. Not a wrinkle, not a thread out of place. His tie was still perfectly knotted. His appearance was immaculate. But inside, something had fractured. He picked up the glass of whiskey that sat on his desk, untouched since he'd poured it. The amber liquid caught the light. He looked at it for a long moment, thinking about antifreeze, about betrayal, about how you could never trust anything in your own home again once you'd lost that innocence. He set the glass down without drinking it. The mansion around him was finally quiet. The guests had left. The police had left. Vincent Wu had gone to the precinct to ensure the paperwork was filed correctly. The caterers had cleaned up the remains of the Christmas Eve party, the melted ice sculptures, the wilting flowers, the broken dreams of a woman who'd thought she was untouchable. Adrian sat down in his leather chair, the one that had belonged to his father. He'd sat in this chair thousands of times, making decisions that affected lives, building an empire through means he'd rather not contemplate. But tonight, sitting in this chair felt different. Tonight, all of that power felt empty. He'd won. He'd caught the conspiracy. He'd had Isabella and Marcus arrested. He'd chosen justice over violence. And it felt like loss. Sophia found him an hour later. She knocked softly on the study door, and when Adrian didn't answer, she let herself in anyway. She'd learned early in her time at the mansion that sometimes the people you cared about didn't have the strength to tell you to come in. Sometimes they just needed you to show up. Adrian was sitting in the darkness, the only light coming from the Seoul skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't look up when she entered. He just sat there, staring out at the city, at the thousands of lives being lived simultaneously, at the world that continued to turn even when your own world had just shattered. Sophia walked over and stood beside him, not sitting, not presuming to take a chair, just standing. Just being present. That was what Adrian needed, not words, not comfort in the traditional sense. Just someone standing in the darkness with him. They stayed like that for a long time. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. Sophia didn't know and didn't care about measuring time anymore. She just stood there, occasionally glancing at Adrian's profile, seeing the way his jaw was clenched, the way his shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with his physical body. Finally, Adrian spoke. "It's done," he said quietly. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "It's over." Sophia said nothing. She waited. "She was going to kill me," Adrian continued, still staring out at the city. "My own wife. The woman I married because my mother asked me to. The woman I lived with, the woman I provided for, the woman I tried to be faithful to despite everything." He paused. "And my cousin. Marcus. I trusted him. I gave him everything. And he was going to help her do it." Sophia finally moved. She sat down on the arm of Adrian's chair, close but not presuming intimacy beyond that. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. Adrian was quiet for a long time. "Empty," he said finally. "I thought I'd feel angry. I thought I'd feel vindicated. I thought I'd feel something. But I just feel empty. Like they took something from me when they betrayed me, and getting them arrested doesn't give it back." Sophia understood. She'd felt that same emptiness when her mother died. That hollow ache that came when you realized that some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. Some losses, once suffered, couldn't be repaired. Adrian reached for the glass of whiskey on the desk. He picked it up, brought it to his lips, and then stopped. He stared at the amber liquid for a long moment before setting it back down, untouched. "I can't," he said quietly. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust a drink again. Every time I see whiskey, I'm going to think about antifreeze. About poison. About how someone I loved was willing to kill me for money." Sophia reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it said everything. "I'm here. You're not alone. This will get easier." Adrian turned to face her. In the darkness of the study, with the Seoul skyline glittering behind them, Adrian took Sophia's face in his hands. Gently. Reverently. Like she was something precious, something he'd almost lost without ever really having. "You saved my life," he said. His eyes were glistening now, but his voice remained steady. "How do I repay that?" Sophia's heart was beating so fast she thought it might break through her ribs. "You don't," she said quietly. "You just live the life they tried to take from you. Live it fully and well." And then Adrian kissed her. It was different from the kiss in her room at 4 a.m. That kiss had been desperate, passionate, an acknowledgement of desire that neither of them could deny anymore. This kiss was tender. Careful. It tasted like gratitude and redemption and the promise of something better. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Not a question. Not a demand. Just a request. A hope. Not as a maid. Not as staff. Stay with me. As yourself. Just stay." Sophia pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. She could see her own reflection in his pupils, could see herself mirrored in the darkness of his gaze. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," Adrian said. "This is insane, isn't it? You work for me. You're half my age. You're from Colombia. I'm Korean. We have no business being together." "No," Sophia agreed. "We don't. And yet," Adrian continued, "I can't imagine you leaving. I can't imagine going back to pretending we're just employer and employee. I can't imagine not having you in my life." Sophia smiled through the tears that were now streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll stay." Adrian pulled her close, and Sophia settled into his arms, her head resting against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, fast and strong, the heartbeat of a man who'd just survived something that should have killed him. They talked through the night. Adrian told Sophia about his childhood, about his father, a man who'd built an empire on violence and fear. About how Adrian had been groomed from a young age to take over the family business. About how his father had taught him that trust was weakness, that sentiment was a liability, that the only way to survive in their world was to be harder, colder, more ruthless than everyone else. "I became exactly what he wanted me to be," Adrian said. They were sitting on the couch in his study now, Sophia curled against his side, his arm around her shoulders. "But my mother, she was different. She was kind. She was gentle. And she didn't want that for me. Before she died, she told me something. She said, 'Adrian, I hope you become a man worthy of being loved, not feared. I hope you build something beautiful with your life, not something built on fear.'" "Did you listen to her?" Sophia asked. Adrian shook his head. "Not then. After she died, I told myself that her dreams for me were naive. That they wouldn't work in my world. That I had to be like my father if I was going to survive." He paused. "But I wasn't happy. I was successful. I was powerful. I was feared. But I wasn't happy." Sophia shared her own story. About growing up in Lagos with her mother and 3 siblings. About her mother working 2 jobs to keep them fed and in school. About the lessons her mother had taught her about integrity, about standing up for what was right, about the importance of letting your voice be heard even when the world told you to be silent. "My mother always said that silence makes you complicit," Sophia said. "That if you see something wrong and you don't speak up, you're just as guilty as the person doing the wrong thing. That's why I told you about Isabella. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." Adrian tightened his arm around her. "Your mother sounds like she was an incredible woman." "She was," Sophia said. "She died 2 years ago. Cancer. I was here, at university, and I couldn't be there. I was on a video call with her when she—" Sophia's voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Adrian kissed the top of her head. "I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a while, each thinking about the mothers who'd shaped them so profoundly. The mothers who'd believed in them even when they didn't believe in themselves. "You know what I realized tonight?" Adrian said after a long pause. "I realized that my mother's dreams for me aren't naive. They're just harder. My father's path was easy. Violence is easy. Fear is easy. But choosing to be better, choosing justice over revenge, choosing to love someone when you've been taught that love is a weakness, that's the hard path. That's what takes real strength." Sophia looked up at him. "I think your mother would be proud of you." Adrian pulled her closer. They sat like that until the sun began to rise, until the darkness gave way to grey, until the Seoul skyline was illuminated by the first light of dawn. 2 people who had no business being together, who'd come from completely different worlds, who'd been thrown together by circumstances beyond their control. But somehow, in the darkness of that study, surrounded by the weight of Adrian's past and the promise of Sophia's future, they'd found something real. The morning light streamed through the windows of Adrian's study. Adrian and Sophia had finally fallen asleep on the couch, tangled together, exhausted by the emotional weight of the night. Sophia's head was on Adrian's chest. Adrian's arm was protectively around her waist. They looked like two people who'd finally found peace after a very long storm. When Sophia woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. She had no idea what time it was. She had no idea what was supposed to happen next. But for the first time since she'd started working in this mansion, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Adrian was alive. What mattered was that Isabella and Marcus were in police custody. What mattered was that Adrian had chosen justice over violence. What mattered was that she was no longer invisible. Adrian stirred when she moved. His eyes opened, and the first thing he saw was Sophia. For a moment, he just looked at her, as if checking to make sure she was real. That the night hadn't been a dream. "Good morning," Sophia whispered. Adrian smiled. A real smile, not the calculated smile he used when dealing with business associates. A genuine, vulnerable smile. "Good morning," he replied. They could hear the mansion waking up around them. Staff moving through the hallways. The sounds of a new day beginning. But in Adrian's study, suspended in the golden light of morning, they existed in a bubble where none of that mattered. "What happens now?" Sophia asked. Adrian was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Now," he said slowly, "we wait for the trial. We face the legal system. We deal with the fallout from what happened last night. We figure out what my organization looks like going forward, because I can't keep doing what I was doing before. My father's way is over." He paused, running his fingers through Sophia's hair. "And we figure out what this is," he said softly. "You and me. What we're building." Sophia felt fear and excitement warring inside her chest. People are going to talk. They're going to say terrible things about us. They're going to question why you're with a maid, why you're with someone so much younger, why you're with someone who's not even Korean. Adrian's expression hardened. "Let them talk. I spent my entire life trying to live up to my father's expectations, trying to be the man he wanted me to be. I'm done with that. From this moment forward, I'm going to be the man my mother wanted me to be. And my mother would approve of you. She would love you." Sophia felt tears spring to her eyes again. She'd cried more in the past 24 hours than she had in the past year. But these were different tears. These weren't tears of fear or desperation. They were tears of hope. "I love you," she said. The words came out before she'd even thought them, but the moment they were in the air, she knew they were true. She loved Adrian Chen. She loved the man he was becoming. She loved the possibility of what they could build together. Adrian's breath caught. He tilted her chin up and looked at her directly. "Say that again." "I love you," Sophia repeated. Louder this time. More certain. "I love you, Adrian Chen." Adrian kissed her then, long and deep, a kiss that tasted like a promise. A promise that he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of that love. A promise that he would choose her every day. A promise that together, they would build something beautiful from the ashes of his old life. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too, Sophia Reyes. God help me, I love you." They sat together in the golden light of the morning, holding each other, not knowing what the future held but knowing that whatever it was, they would face it together. Outside, Seoul continued its business. The world continued to turn. Courts and lawyers would become involved. Trials would happen. The underworld would react to the news that Adrian Chen had worked with the police. There would be consequences. There would be challenges. But in Adrian's study, in the golden light of morning, two people who had no business being together were beginning to build something real. Something honest. Something beautiful. And that, they both knew, was worth fighting for. The adrenaline has worn off. The immediate crisis is over. Isabella and Marcus are in police custody. Adrian has chosen justice over violence. And now he and Sophia have to reckon with what they've started. This is the moment after the climax, where the real work begins. This is when Adrian has to grieve, has to process, has to let himself feel the weight of the losses he's suffered. And Sophia is there, present, holding him, being the anchor that keeps him from drowning. Betrayal doesn't end when the betrayer is arrested. Adrian has lost 2 people he trusted. That loss doesn't disappear because he's caught them. If anything, it's worse because now he has to accept that his judgment was so wrong, that he was so blind. But what happens in Adrian's study that night, the conversations, the vulnerability, the mutual opening up, that's what begins to heal him. Not time. Not revenge. Not the satisfaction of seeing Isabella and Marcus arrested. But love. Real, honest, vulnerable love. Sophia never demands anything. She doesn't ask for gratitude. She doesn't ask Adrian to change. She just shows up. She stands in the darkness with him. She listens. She shares her own story. She makes herself vulnerable right alongside him. That's what real love looks like. The sunrise isn't just a passage of time. It's symbolic. It's Adrian's darkness giving way to light. It's the promise of a new day, a new man, a new life. And Sophia is there to see it with him. The courtroom was packed. 3 months had passed since Christmas Eve. 3 months of preparation, legal filings, media frenzy. The trial of Kim Isabella and Park Marcus had become the scandal of the year in Seoul. News outlets couldn't stop talking about it. Social media was flooded with speculation. Everyone had opinions about the beautiful socialite who'd tried to murder her husband, and the charismatic cousin who'd helped her plan it. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage of Isabella and Marcus in bed, planning the murder. Audio recordings of their conversations. Financial records showing years of embezzlement. The purchased antifreeze. The paid-off doctor who'd turned state's evidence. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Insurance policy documents with double indemnity clearly outlined. There was no question about what they'd done. The only question was what the court would do about it. Adrian sat in the courtroom every single day. He wore dark suits, expensive watches, the uniform of a successful businessman. But his presence meant something more than just showing up. It meant he was facing his past. It meant he was accepting the reality of his wife's betrayal, his cousin's disloyalty. It meant he was choosing to let the legal system determine justice rather than handling it through his underworld connections. And sitting beside him was Sophia. She wore simple, elegant clothes. Nothing that called attention to herself, nothing that tried to prove she belonged in a courtroom. She was just there, present, holding Adrian's hand when the video evidence played, squeezing his arm when Isabella's recorded voice filled the courtroom, talking about how Adrian didn't love her, how she was finally going to be free. The media couldn't stop talking about their relationship. Crime boss's affair with housemaid read one headline. The maid who saved him read another. There were rumors that Adrian had paid Sophia to testify. There were jokes about the age difference, about the class difference. There were racist comments about what a woman from Colombia was doing with a Korean man, what she could possibly want with him besides money and status. Adrian shut it down hard and fast. During a press conference, a reporter asked him directly about his relationship with Sophia. Without hesitation, Adrian walked over to where Sophia was sitting and took her hand. He pulled her to her feet and looked directly at the cameras. Sophia Reyes saved my life, he said firmly. She had the courage to speak up when she could have stayed silent. She risked her job, her visa status, her entire future in this country to tell me the truth. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that everyone who disrespects her understands that they're disrespecting me. Any man here who thinks he's going to make jokes about Sophia, who thinks he's going to question her character or her intentions, I want you to know that I take that personally. Sophia is the most honorable person I've ever met. And any man who can't respect that has no business being in my presence. The reporters went silent. Sophia's face turned red, but she was smiling. And Adrian didn't let go of her hand. Not for a single moment. Isabella's defense was pathetic. Her lawyers tried everything. They claimed that the video evidence was fabricated. That Adrian had forced her to make those recordings. That she'd been under duress when she spoke about the murder plot. They claimed she was insane, that she couldn't be held responsible for her actions because she wasn't in her right mind. None of it worked. The jury listened to the evidence. They watched the video. They heard the audio recordings. They saw the financial records. They listened to testimony from the doctor, from the bank employees, from household staff who'd been bribed. They heard Adrian's calm, measured account of how he'd discovered the conspiracy and chosen to gather evidence rather than respond with violence. And after less than 4 hours of deliberation, they came back with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Isabella and Marcus were both found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and corruption of a public official. The sentencing came a week later. Isabella received 25 years to life. The judge's words were cold and measured. She'd planned carefully. She'd involved multiple people. She'd shown no remorse. The crime was premeditated and calculated, designed to look like something it wasn't. Marcus received 15 additional years on top of his conspiracy sentence, bringing his total to over 30 years in prison. His crimes were more extensive. Years of embezzlement, corruption of witnesses, conspiracy to commit murder. The judge noted that his betrayal of family trust made the crime even more egregious. As the officers led them away, neither Adrian nor Sophia looked at them. They just sat quietly, hands clasped, while justice was served. The transformation of Adrian's organization began immediately. Adrian called a meeting with his inner circle, the men who'd been with him for years, who'd helped him build his empire. He laid it out clearly: the criminal enterprises were being phased out. The money laundering operations would be restructured through legitimate businesses. They would move into clean industries, real estate development, technology, international business. Some of the men understood. Vincent Wu, Adrian's most trusted associate, embraced the change immediately. He saw the opportunity to build something real, something that didn't require them to look over their shoulders constantly. Others resisted. Some of Adrian's longer-standing associates felt that Adrian was betraying his father's legacy, becoming soft, letting a woman influence his decisions. They questioned his authority. They questioned his judgment. But no one openly defied him. Adrian Chen was still feared. He was still respected. And even though he was choosing a different path, everyone understood that he was still dangerous. That he would still do what needed to be done to protect himself and his interests. He just wouldn't do it through violence anymore. "We're moving into the legitimate world," Adrian told his team. "We're going to be businessmen. Real businessmen. The kind who pay taxes and follow laws and answer to authorities instead of operating outside them. It's going to be harder than what we've been doing. It's going to require discipline. But it's the only way I can live with myself anymore." Sophia's transformation was equally dramatic. With Adrian's financial support, she returned to university to finish her degree in international business. She studied relentlessly, earning honors in every class. Her professors were impressed by her intelligence, her work ethic, her obvious passion for the subject matter. Adrian funded a scholarship in his mother's name for international students. Sophia was one of the first recipients. The scholarship would eventually help hundreds of students from across the world attend the university, breaking barriers, creating opportunities. When Sophia graduated, Adrian was there in the front row, tears streaming down his face as she walked across the stage. She'd done it. This young woman who'd come to Korea with nothing but dreams and determination. This woman who'd had the courage to stand up for what was right. She was now a college graduate with honors. 6 months later, Sophia joined Adrian's company as a business partner. Not as his girlfriend. Not as the woman he was dating. But as an equal partner in his vision to transform his family's underworld empire into something legitimate and meaningful. Together, they began expanding internationally, focusing on markets in Africa and Latin America. Sophia's background, her languages, her understanding of international business, all of it became invaluable. The media loved it. The beautiful love story that had blossomed from tragedy. The maid who'd become a business partner. The crime boss who'd chosen love and legitimacy over violence and power. But more importantly, Adrian and Sophia loved it. Because they weren't just building a business. They were building a life. A real life. A life that honored both their pasts and allowed them to create a different future. 1 year after the trial ended, on Christmas Eve, Adrian took Sophia back to the mansion. The place had been transformed. The bedroom where Isabella and Marcus had planned his murder was now a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, filled with books in multiple languages. A beautiful desk sat by the window, where Adrian could work on business matters. But it was no longer a place of betrayal. It was a place of knowledge, of growth, of possibility. The sitting room where Isabella had confidently discussed poisoning him was now a children's playroom. Toys were arranged neatly on shelves. A soft rug covered the floor. A play kitchen sat in one corner. Pictures of Adrian's mother hung on the walls, a reminder of the woman who'd wanted Adrian to build something beautiful. The bedroom Adrian had slept in alone for so long had been remodeled. It was now a gorgeous master suite, not for him and Isabella, but for him and Sophia. The bed was enormous and soft. The windows overlooked the frozen Seoul skyline. It was a room built for love, for partnership, for two people who'd chosen each other. Adrian led Sophia through the remodeled mansion slowly, letting her take in every change. When they reached the main hall, they stood beneath the same Christmas tree that had been there the night of the attempted murder. "Do you remember the last time we stood here?" Adrian asked. Sophia nodded. She remembered everything about that night. The fear. The relief. The moment when she realized Adrian was alive, when she understood that her courage had made a difference. "Everything has changed," Adrian said. "The mansion looks different. My business looks different. My life looks completely different. But none of it would have happened without you." He pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket. Sophia's breath caught. "I know it's fast," Adrian said. He was nervous now, his usual confidence replaced by vulnerability. "I know we've only known each other for a year. I know people are going to question us. I know there are going to be challenges ahead. But I also know that I love you more than I've ever loved anyone in my entire life. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build a family with you. I want to create a legacy that my mother would be proud of." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, with a diamond that caught the light from the Christmas tree. "Sophia Reyes," Adrian said, his voice steady now, "will you marry me?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She thought about how her mother had taught her that integrity mattered. That standing up for what was right was worth any personal cost. That her voice had value even when the world told her she was invisible. Her mother would have loved Adrian. Not the crime boss version, but the man he was becoming. The man who'd chosen justice over violence. The man who'd built a legitimate business. The man who'd funded scholarships for international students. The man who stood in front of the world and defended the woman he loved. "Yes," Sophia said. "Yes, Adrian. I'll marry you." Adrian slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as the Christmas tree lights blinked above them, casting their shadows on the walls of the mansion that had once been a place of darkness but was now becoming a place of light. "Justice has been served. Isabella will spend at least 25 years in prison. Marcus will spend even longer. And Adrian has been officially cleansed of his past. But more than that, Adrian has built a new life. A legitimate business. A partnership with Sophia. A future that honors his mother's memory and his own need to become someone better. Sophia has become more than just a survivor. She's become a partner in Adrian's vision. She's become the woman he loves. She's become the bridge between his old world and his new world. This is what redemption looks like. It's not instant. It's not painless. It's methodical, careful, deliberate. It requires facing the consequences of your past. It requires changing every aspect of your life. It requires finding someone who believes in you enough to stand beside you while you do it. Adrian's transformation is real. His love for Sophia is real. His commitment to building something legitimate is real. But none of it would have happened without that first moment of courage. Sophia's decision to tell him the truth, and Adrian's decision to listen. 1 year had passed since Christmas Eve. 1 year since Adrian came home 3 hours early to discover his wife in bed with his cousin. 1 year since Sophia had pulled him into the darkness and whispered 2 words that changed his life: be quiet. 1 year since everything fell apart. And yet, standing in the main hall of the mansion on this Christmas Eve, with the massive 20-foot Christmas tree glowing with thousands of lights, Adrian understood that everything had also come together. The mansion looked different this year. The decorations were the same: white flowers, twinkling lights, ice sculptures, but the feeling was completely different. A year ago, on this night, the beauty had been a facade for betrayal. This year, the beauty was real. It came from a place of hope, not deception. Adrian had spent the day preparing for this moment. He'd sent Sophia out with Vincent Wu on a pretext, some business matter that needed her attention. He'd had the mansion decorated exactly the way he wanted it. He'd practiced what he was going to say 100 times, and every time he practiced it, he felt like his heart might burst out of his chest. Because he loved her. God, he loved her so much it terrified him. When Sophia returned, she found Adrian waiting for her in the main hall. He was dressed in a dark suit, freshly pressed, and there was something in his expression that made her pause immediately. "What's going on?" she asked, a slight smile playing at her lips. She'd learned to read Adrian over the past year. She could tell when something was significant. "Come with me," Adrian said, extending his hand. Sophia took it, and Adrian led her slowly through the mansion. They walked past the library that had once been Isabella's bedroom. They walked past the children's playroom that had once been the sitting room where Isabella and Marcus had plotted his death. They walked toward the main hall, toward the Christmas tree. When they entered the hall, Sophia's breath caught. Adrian had transformed the space completely. Candles lined every available surface, their soft flames creating a warm, intimate glow. Fresh roses, white and red, were arranged in crystal vases throughout the room. The Christmas tree lights were the only other illumination, and they cast everything in a magical, ethereal light. "Adrian," Sophia whispered, "what is this?" Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he led her to the base of the Christmas tree, the exact spot where, 1 year ago, Isabella had tried to poison him. The spot where Adrian had stopped the murder before it could happen. "Do you remember?" Adrian asked quietly. "I remember everything," Sophia said. "How could I forget?" Adrian held both of Sophia's hands, looking at her directly, his expression intense and vulnerable all at once. "I need you to understand something," Adrian began. "I need you to know exactly what you've done for me. Not just the obvious, saving my life, exposing the conspiracy, having the courage to speak truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. Those things matter. But there's more." Sophia was crying now, tears already streaming down her face, and he hadn't even gotten to the main event yet. "Before I met you," Adrian continued, "I was a man without a future. I was building an empire on a foundation of fear and violence. I was living my father's dream, not my own. I was powerful, but I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. I thought that was the price of success. I thought that loneliness was what a man in my position had to accept." Adrian paused, and Sophia could see his eyes glistening as well. "And then you came into my life," he said. "You didn't come as a guest or a business associate or a woman trying to catch my attention. You came as an invisible servant. As someone I should have overlooked. As someone I did overlook, until you had the courage to save me." He took a breath. "But it wasn't just about saving my life, Sophia. You saved my future. You saved my possibility of becoming someone better. You reminded me of what my mother had believed in. You showed me that integrity matters. That standing up for what's right is worth any personal cost. That there's more to being a man than being feared." Sophia was shaking now, her whole body trembling with emotion. "I went from a man living in darkness to a man walking toward light," Adrian continued. "And you were the one who showed me which direction to walk. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You stood beside me when you could have run. You loved me when I was still becoming worthy of that love." Adrian released one of Sophia's hands and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Sophia's breath stopped completely. "Sophia Reyes," Adrian said, and his voice was shaking now, cracking with emotion, "I'm not perfect. I have a past that's complicated and dark. I've done things I can't undo. I've hurt people. I've lived a life that I'm not proud of. But I also know that I'm a better man today because of you. I want to spend the rest of my life becoming even better because of you." Adrian dropped to one knee. Sophia covered her mouth with her hands, tears flowing freely now, her whole body shaking with the enormity of the moment. "I want to build a future with you that's bright," Adrian said, opening the velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, with a diamond that caught the Christmas tree lights and threw rainbow prisms across the room. A future filled with love and honesty and the kind of partnership that builds something beautiful. A future where we honor both of our pasts and create something new together. Adrian looked up at her, his heart completely open, completely vulnerable. "Sophia, will you marry me?" For a moment, Sophia couldn't speak. The words were there, trapped in her throat, overwhelming her. She'd dreamed about this moment, but not in a specific way. She just hoped that somehow, miraculously, she and Adrian would find a way to stay together. "Yes," she finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Adrian. Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian stood up, pulled the ring from the box, and slid it onto her finger. Sophia looked down at the ring, at the way the light played across the diamond, at the way it caught the glow from the Christmas tree, and she felt like she was dreaming. Adrian pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was a kiss full of promise and gratitude and the kind of deep, soul-level love that transcends the physical. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing simultaneously, the kind of emotional release that comes when something you've been holding in finally gets to come out. "I love you," Adrian said. "I love you so much, Sophia." "I love you too," Sophia replied. "So much. I can't believe this is real." Adrian smiled, a real smile, the kind that came from deep inside, the kind that his mother would have loved to see on his face. "It's real," he said. "Everything is real now. No more darkness. No more pretending. No more living a lie. Just us, building something beautiful together." That night, as they stood beneath the Christmas tree, Adrian's mind drifted to the journey that had brought them to this moment. He thought about how close he'd come to losing it all. How if he'd acted on his first instinct when he heard Isabella's laugh, if he'd simply walked into that bedroom with his weapon drawn, everything would have ended differently. Isabella and Marcus would have been dead, but so would Adrian's chance at redemption. He would still be a man of the underworld, a man governed by his father's legacy of fear and violence. Instead, he'd listened to Sophia. He'd chosen to gather evidence instead of taking revenge. He'd chosen justice over violence. He'd chosen to become someone different. 2 whispered words, "Be quiet," had changed his entire trajectory. Adrian thought about Isabella, sitting in a maximum security prison, serving a sentence of 25 years to life. He thought about Marcus, sitting in his own cell, serving 30 years for crimes that could never be undone. He felt no anger toward them anymore. No rage. No desire for revenge. He felt pity. They'd had the opportunity to choose differently, and they hadn't. They'd chosen betrayal and greed and violence. And those choices had destroyed their lives. Adrian had made different choices. He'd chosen to listen to Sophia. He'd chosen to trust the legal system. He'd chosen to transform his organization. He'd chosen to become a legitimate businessman. He'd chosen to love Sophia openly, despite the class difference, despite the age difference, despite the racism and judgment that came from a world that couldn't accept their relationship. And those choices had led him here. To this moment, beneath this Christmas tree, with this woman who'd risked everything to save him. "What are you thinking?" Sophia asked, squeezing his hand. Adrian looked at her beautiful face illuminated by the Christmas tree lights, at the ring on her finger reflecting the glow, at the pure joy in her eyes. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," Adrian said. "For you. For this moment. For the fact that I get to spend the rest of my life with you." Sophia leaned her head on Adrian's shoulder, and they stood together beneath the Christmas tree, surrounded by the symbols of their journey. The same tree that had been there the night of the attempted murder. The same space that had been transformed from a place of darkness into a place of light. Adrian thought about his mother. About how, in her final days, she'd told him she hoped he would become a man worthy of being loved, not feared. He thought about how her words had taken a year to truly sink in. How it had taken meeting Sophia, this young woman from Colombia who had the courage to speak truth, to finally understand what his mother had meant. Being loved was better than being feared. Building something beautiful was better than building something based on power and control. Choosing justice over violence was harder, but it was also more real, more sustainable, more meaningful. Adrian squeezed Sophia's hand. "I want to marry you here," he said suddenly. "In this mansion. Beneath this Christmas tree. I want to create a new memory in this place, one that completely overwrites the darkness that happened here before." Sophia pulled back and looked at him. "Really? Really?" Adrian confirmed. "I want to stand in this exact spot and vow to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me. I want to build a family in this mansion. I want to fill these halls with laughter and love instead of secrets and betrayal." "Then that's what we'll do," Sophia said. She smiled through her tears. "We'll make this place beautiful again. Not by pretending the darkness never happened, but by acknowledging it and then choosing to fill it with light." Adrian pulled her close again, and they danced slowly beneath the Christmas tree, even though there was no music playing. The only sound was the soft hum of the lights and the beating of their hearts, synchronized now, moving as one. Adrian has proposed. Sophia has said yes. They're engaged. But more than that, Adrian has made a choice to transform this mansion, a place that was once a site of betrayal and attempted murder, into a place of joy and love. His choosing to rewrite the story of this space, just as he's chosen to rewrite the story of his own life. This is what redemption looks like when it's complete. Adrian hasn't just survived the betrayal. He hasn't just caught the conspirators and sent them to prison. He hasn't just transformed his business and his life. He's also forgiven himself. He's also accepted that his past doesn't have to define his future. He's also learned to love, genuinely and deeply, in a way that transforms both him and the person he loves. And Sophia hasn't just saved Adrian. She's also saved herself. She's gone from being invisible to being seen. She's gone from being a servant to being an equal partner. She's gone from having no prospects to having a future beyond her wildest dreams. But neither of them is treating this as a fairy tale where all the pain of the past is erased. They're treating it as a commitment to acknowledge the darkness and deliberately, consciously choose light. The Christmas tree is no longer a symbol of betrayal. It's a symbol of transformation. It's a symbol of how the same space can hold completely different meanings depending on what we choose to put into it. That's the entire story of Adrian and Sophia's journey. A year ago, they were standing in the shadows around this tree. Now, they're standing beneath it, fully illuminated, fully visible, fully themselves. The wedding was beautiful in a way that only blended traditions could be. 3 months after Adrian's proposal, on a warm spring day in March, Sophia walked down the aisle toward her future. She wore a white dress, a blend of Korean and Nigerian styles that flowed like water, embroidered with intricate patterns that represented both her heritage and Adrian's. Her hair was adorned with white flowers and gold beads that caught the light as she moved. Adrian stood at the altar, waiting for her, dressed in a traditional Korean suit that he'd paired with colors that honored Sophia's Nigerian heritage. His hands were shaking slightly. This man who'd faced down rival gangs without flinching, who'd orchestrated complex business deals, who'd confronted the conspiracy that would have destroyed him, he was nervous about getting married. Sophia's family had come from Lagos. Her 3 siblings, her father, her extended family. They'd arrived skeptical, worried that their youngest daughter was making a terrible mistake. A Korean man from a criminal background. A man who was so much older. What could possibly make this a good idea? But Adrian had won them over through sheer sincerity. He'd spent time with them. He'd listened to their concerns. He'd shown them, through his actions and his words, that he was absolutely committed to spending the rest of his life making Sophia happy. He'd even learned a few phrases in Yoruba, Sophia's native language, which had made her father laugh and her mother cry. As Sophia reached the altar, Adrian took her hands. They looked at each other, two people from completely different worlds, now standing together in front of everyone who mattered to them. Vincent Wu sat in the front row as Adrian's best man, beaming with pride. His boss, his brother, was finally at peace. Finally happy. Vincent caught the eye of Sophia's best friend, Elena. A Korean woman Sophia had met at university who was serving as the maid of honor. They exchanged a look that said, "Can you believe we're here?" A year and a half ago, none of this seemed possible. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. Adrian and Sophia exchanged vows in both Korean and English, promising to honor each other, to support each other, to build something beautiful together. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. The reception was a celebration of cultures. The venue had been transformed, one side decorated in traditional Korean style, the other side adorned with Nigerian colors and fabrics. The food was a blend of both cuisines. And the music started with traditional Korean songs, then transitioned into K-pop, and then into Afrobeats that had everyone Adrian's family, Sophia's family, their business associates, dancing together. On the dance floor, Vincent Wu pulled Elena into a dance, and they both laughed at the absurdity of it all. "Remember a year and a half ago?" Vincent said. "If someone had told me that the boss would be here, married to a Nigerian woman he'd met as a housemaid, I would have called them crazy." Elena smiled. "The best love stories are the ones you never see coming." "Amen to that," Vincent replied. Adrian's business transformation was complete, but it wasn't easy. In the months and years following the proposal, Adrian worked methodically to transform his criminal empire into a legitimate organization. The process required him to phase out illegal enterprises, negotiate with associates who'd been with him for years, and navigate the complex legal and financial landscape of laundering his organization's money through legitimate channels. Some of his old associates understood the vision and stayed. They recognized that legitimacy was safer, that building a sustainable business required legal foundations. These men adapted to the new structure and became valuable players in Adrian's legitimate enterprises. Others resisted. They felt that Adrian was betraying his father's legacy, becoming soft, letting love influence his decisions. Some left the organization voluntarily. Others were bought out. And a few simply disappeared, choosing to continue their criminal operations elsewhere. But no one openly defied Adrian. Even in his transformation, he remained a force to be reckoned with. His intelligence was sharper than his violence had ever been. His business sense was ruthless in a way that was completely legal and completely legitimate. Adrian now sat on the boards of multiple charities. He funded schools in underprivileged neighborhoods. He worked with law enforcement to develop programs that helped reform former gang members, giving them opportunities to leave the criminal world just as he had. His mother's scholarship program for international students had expanded to help hundreds of young people from around the world pursue their dreams. And Sophia was at the heart of all of it. As Adrian's wife and business partner, Sophia led the company's African market expansion. She built partnerships in Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa, bringing legitimate business opportunities to communities that desperately needed them. She negotiated deals with intelligence and grace. She understood both the business world and the cultural nuances of the markets she was entering. She was brilliant. Together, Adrian and Sophia built something that neither of them could have built alone. Adrian had the connections, the capital, the business acumen honed by years in the underworld. Sophia had the cultural awareness, the international business education, the moral compass that kept Adrian honest. It was a partnership in the truest sense, two people working together toward a vision that was bigger than either of them individually. 18 months after the wedding, Sophia went into labor. Adrian drove her to the hospital with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for transporting explosives. He drove 5 miles under the speed limit. He made sure Sophia was as comfortable as possible. He held her hand as the contractions came and went, as her body prepared to bring their child into the world. When they got to the hospital, Adrian sat in the delivery room with Sophia, and when the moment came for her to push, he pushed right along with her emotionally, spiritually, with his entire being invested in bringing this child safely into existence. And then, after hours of labor, a sound filled the room that Adrian would never forget. His daughter's first cry. The nurses cleaned her up, wrapped her in a soft blanket, and placed her in Adrian's arms. She was tiny. Impossibly tiny. With a blend of Adrian's features and Sophia's features, creating something entirely new, entirely beautiful. Adrian Chen, the man who'd built an empire on fear and violence, the man who'd been taught that sentiment was weakness, wept. He actually wept, tears streaming down his face, as he looked at this tiny human who was half him and half Sophia. She had Adrian's dark eyes and Sophia's shaped eyebrows. She had Adrian's nose and Sophia's mouth. She was perfect. "Meet your daughter," Sophia said softly, exhausted but radiant. Adrian couldn't speak. He just looked at the baby, memorizing every detail, every feature, every tiny hand and tiny foot. This was his child. His daughter. A human who would grow up in a world shaped by love instead of fear, by integrity instead of violence, by the choices Adrian had made to become better. They named her Grace Minji Chen. Grace, for the undeserved favor that had saved Adrian's life. For the grace that Sophia had shown him by saving him, by loving him, by believing in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And Minji, for Adrian's mother, who'd believed in family and loyalty and the possibility of becoming someone worthy of being loved, not feared. In the hospital room, several hours later, with Sophia asleep beside him, Adrian held Grace and whispered to her. "I'm going to be better for you," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm going to build a world where you're safe. Where you're loved. Where you never have to be afraid. I promise." Adrian Chen always kept his promises. 5 years passed. Grace was now 5 years old, smart, curious, with her father's intensity and her mother's kindness. She asked endless questions and wasn't satisfied with vague answers. She wanted to understand how things worked, why people made the choices they made, what made the world turn the way it did. David Junho came along 2 years after Grace, a rambunctious 3-year-old who had his father's dark eyes but his mother's adventurous spirit. He was always getting into things, always exploring, always pushing boundaries. Adrian and Sophia's home had transformed into something alive with laughter and chaos and the beautiful mess of raising children. The company had expanded internationally. Sophia's African operations were thriving, partnerships in Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa had created legitimate jobs and opportunities for thousands of people. Adrian oversaw the legitimate enterprises, which now included technology companies, real estate development, international shipping, and educational services. They employed thousands of people. They created opportunities. They changed lives. Vincent Wu, who'd been Adrian's right hand in the criminal world, had become Uncle Vincent in the family world. He came to dinner at least twice a week. He taught Grace martial arts. He let David climb on him like he was a jungle gym. He and Adrian sat in Adrian's study sometimes, talking about the old days, but they talked about them with the perspective of men who'd escaped that life. "Do you ever miss it?" Vincent asked once, sitting in Adrian's study with a glass of water. Adrian didn't drink alcohol anymore, and Vincent had stopped as well, out of solidarity. "Never," Adrian said without hesitation. "Not for a second. Not even the power?" Vincent pressed. "The fear. The respect that came from being dangerous?" Adrian shook his head. "The respect I get now, from my children, from Sophia, from the people we've helped through the foundation, that's real respect. That's the kind of respect that stays with you. The kind that comes from knowing you've made the world better instead of worse." The scholarship program had grown exponentially. In Adrian's mother's name, the foundation had helped over 300 international students pursue their dreams. Young people from Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, all of them given opportunities they might not have had otherwise. Sophia served on the board, ensuring that the program maintained its integrity and reached people who genuinely needed the help. One evening, an alumna of the program came to dinner at Adrian and Sophia's home. She was from Nigeria, like Sophia, and she just graduated with honors from the university. She was now working for Sophia's company, leading business development in Accra. I wanted to thank you, she said to Adrian, as they sat around the dinner table with Grace and David, with Vincent Wu and Elena, with Sophia's parents who'd come for an extended visit. For what? Adrian asked. For believing in me, the young woman said. For creating a scholarship that gave me a chance. For showing me that I could build something bigger than I'd imagined. For proving that someone from my background could succeed in places like this. Adrian looked at Sophia, and they exchanged a meaningful glance. This was why they'd done all of it. Not for the business success, though that mattered. Not for the legitimacy, though that mattered too. But for moments like this, where they could see directly how their choices had impacted someone's life. 5 years later, the family gathered around the dinner table. The table was long and wooden, the kind that had room for everyone who mattered. Adrian sat at one end. Sophia sat at the other. Between them, Grace and David made a mess of their food, David more than Grace, though Grace wasn't much better. Vincent Wu sat next to Grace, telling animated stories about his days with Adrian in the business world, carefully editing out the violent and criminal parts. Elena sat next to David, trying to convince him that vegetables were actually delicious. Sophia's parents were there, visiting from Lagos. They looked at Adrian with complete acceptance now. This was the man who loved their daughter. This was the man who'd built a life with her. This was the man who'd given them grandchildren who were loved and safe and happy. Adrian looked around the table at the chaos, at the laughter, at the connections that had been built through choices and sacrifice and the willingness to become someone better. He thought about where he'd been 5 years ago. He thought about Isabella, still sitting in prison, still serving her sentence. He thought about Marcus, in a separate facility, still paying for his crimes. He thought about how different his life could have been if Sophia hadn't had the courage to speak up. If he hadn't had the wisdom to listen. Grace looked up from her food. Daddy, can I ask you something? Of course, baby, Adrian said. Why are you crying? She asked innocently. Adrian smiled and wiped his eyes. Because I'm happy, he said. Because I'm sitting with the people I love most in the world. Because I have a home and a family and a life that I never thought was possible. Grace nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her, and went back to her food. Sophia squeezed Adrian's hand under the table. She understood. She'd watched Adrian transform from a powerful man who was utterly alone to a man surrounded by love. She'd watched him learn to be vulnerable. She'd watched him become a father, a husband, a partner, a philanthropist, a man of integrity. And she'd done the same. She'd gone from being invisible to being seen, respected, valued. She'd gone from surviving to thriving. She'd built a career, founded initiatives, created opportunities for others. She'd become a woman who knew her own power. But more than that, together, they'd built something beautiful. Not despite their different backgrounds, not despite the challenges they'd faced. But partly because of them. Because their different perspectives, their different experiences, their different values. All of it had come together to create something neither of them could have created alone. Vincent Wu raised his glass of water in a toast. To Adrian and Sophia, he said. Who showed all of us that there's more to life than what we thought was possible. Who proved that people can change. Who built something beautiful from something broken. To family, the family you're born with and the family you choose. Everyone around the table raised their glasses. To family, they echoed. And Adrian looked at Sophia, and Sophia looked back at Adrian, and they both understood that they'd accomplished something remarkable. Not just surviving betrayal, but transcending it. Not just catching the conspirators, but using that justice as a foundation to build something real. They'd taken the darkness of Adrian's past and the courage of Sophia's present and woven them together into something bright. Grace asked Adrian to tell her a story about when he was little. David fell asleep in Vincent Wu's lap, his head drooping forward. Sophia laughed at something Elena said. Adrian's mother-in-law told a story in Yoruba that made Adrian's father-in-law laugh so hard he had to wipe his eyes. This was home. This was love. This was what it meant to truly live. This was the legacy they were building, not through money or power or fear, but through honesty and integrity and the daily choice to be better than you were yesterday. Adrian Chen had once been a man afraid that love was weakness. Now, surrounded by the people he loved, by his wife, his children, his brother-in-arms, his extended family, he understood the truth. Love was the strongest thing in the world. Adrian and Sophia have built a life together that's beyond anything they could have imagined. Their business is legitimate and thriving. Their family is growing. Their impact on the world, through the scholarship program, through the reformed organizations, through the opportunities they've created, is profound and meaningful. But more than that, they've built a life that honors the choices they made. Adrian chose to listen instead of act violently. He chose justice over revenge. He chose to become someone better. Sophia chose to speak truth even when it was terrifying. She chose to stand beside Adrian. She chose to build with him instead of running away. And those choices led them here, to a family dinner table, to a life filled with love, to a legacy that will outlast them both. This is what happens when people choose to become better. It's not instant. It's not easy. It requires sacrifice, discipline, vulnerability, and the willingness to be seen. But when you make those choices, when you really commit to becoming someone better, you don't just change your own life. You change the lives of everyone around you. You change your family. You change your business. You change your community. Adrian's transformation rippled outward. It affected everyone who knew him. It gave permission to others to make different choices. It proved that redemption is possible. The dinner table represents everything that Adrian has gained. Family, connection, love, laughter, safety, belonging. A year and a half ago, Adrian was sitting alone in his study, processing betrayal. Now, he's surrounded by people who love him, who see him, who value him not for his power or his wealth, but for who he is as a person. That transformation is the real victory of this story. 10 years. A decade had passed since that cold December night when Adrian Chen came home 3 hours early and discovered the conspiracy that would change everything. A decade since Sophia Reyes pulled him into the darkness and whispered 2 words that altered the course of both their lives forever. The garden looked almost identical to how it had looked that night. The same stone pathways. The same hedges, now taller and fuller. The same winter cold in the air. But this time, there was snow, soft, fresh snow that had just fallen, covering the garden in a blanket of white, just like it had 10 years ago. Adrian and Sophia walked through the garden slowly, hand in hand, their breath creating small clouds in the cold air. Adrian stopped at the exact spot where Sophia had first pulled him into the shadows. The spot where she'd told him about the conspiracy. The spot where everything had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Adrian asked quietly. "Saving me? Getting involved in all of this? If you could go back 10 years and change that moment, would you?" Sophia turned to face him. The woman who stood before him now was different from the frightened housemaid who'd pulled him into the darkness that night. She was confident. She was successful. She was a businesswoman, a mother, a partner in every sense of the word. But her eyes held the same courage they'd held a decade ago. "Not for a single second," Sophia said firmly. "Not for one moment of one day in the past 10 years have I regretted it. You were worth saving, Adrian. You were always worth saving. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Adrian pulled her close and kissed her deep and sweet, a kiss that held 10 years of memories. Memories of discovery and fear. Memories of love blooming in the darkness. Memories of building something real together. A kiss that promised a lifetime of more memories yet to come. When they pulled apart, they could hear something drifting through the cold air from the house. Laughter. Children's laughter. "Come on," Sophia said, tugging Adrian's hand. "Grace will wonder where we are." As they walked back toward the mansion, they could hear the chaos unfolding inside. Grace's voice, now more mature at 15, was calling out something about homework. David, now 13, was making jokes about something. The household staff was moving around, preparing dinner. The nanny was calling out to the younger children because Adrian and Sophia had 2 more since David, giving them 4 children total now. The mansion that had once been a place of betrayal and darkness had transformed into a home filled with life and love and the beautiful mess of a family that worked. Adrian stood in the garden, watching the lights of the mansion glow warm against the dark evening sky, and he thought about how close he'd come to losing it all. He thought about Isabella, still sitting in prison, still serving her sentence. He thought about Marcus, in a different facility, still paying for his crimes. They'd chosen their path, and they were living with the consequences. But Adrian had chosen a different path. And look at what that choice had led to. A partner who saw him, not his money, not his power, not the fear that surrounded him. But saw him. Really saw him. Saw his capacity for goodness even when he didn't see it in himself. A family built on love, not obligation. Children who would grow up knowing that their father was a man of integrity. A man who'd chosen to become better. A man who believed that love was strength, not weakness. A life with meaning and purpose. Not built on the foundation of fear and violence that his father had created, but built on the foundation of justice and love that his mother had believed in. Adrian thought about that night 10 years ago when Isabella had tried to poison him. How, in that moment, everything could have ended. How his father's legacy of darkness could have continued. How he could have descended further into the criminal underworld. Instead, he'd chosen to listen to Sophia. He'd chosen to gather evidence instead of taking revenge. He'd chosen justice over violence. He'd chosen to become someone different. 2 whispered words had changed his entire trajectory. Be quiet. Sometimes the worst moments of your life are actually doorways. Doorways to something better, something real, something meaningful. You just have to be brave enough to walk through them. Sophia, walking back toward the house, thought about her own journey. She'd left Lagos with nothing but dreams. She'd come to Korea with hope and determination and the belief that the world had more to offer her than she'd been given. She'd arrived as an international student, naive and hopeful. She'd graduated and stayed, taking a job as a housemaid to survive. She never imagined that she'd find love. Not with a man like Adrian Chen. Not with a Korean businessman from the criminal underworld. Not with a man she should never have trusted but did. She never imagined that one act of courage, speaking up about the conspiracy, risking her job and her visa status, would lead to building a life beyond her wildest dreams. Sophia had left Lagos as a girl with no prospects. She'd returned as a woman with a degree, a career, a business partnership, a family. She'd returned as someone who mattered. Someone whose voice had power. Someone whose choices could shape the world around her. Her mother had always told her that silence makes you complicit. That standing up for what's right is always worth the cost. Sophia had finally understood, fully and completely, what her mother meant. The greatest gift she could give her children was the example of moral courage. The example of a woman who'd stood up for what was right, even when it was terrifying. The example of someone who'd believed that one person could make a difference. As Adrian and Sophia approached the mansion, their hands still clasped together, Adrian thought about the broader impact of their choices. The scholarship program had helped over 500 international students now. Young people from every continent, every background, every circumstance, had been given the opportunity to pursue their dreams because Adrian and Sophia believed in the power of education and opportunity. The legitimate business empire had created thousands of jobs. It had provided pathways for people who wanted to leave the criminal underworld, just as Adrian had. It had proven that you could build something powerful and meaningful without relying on violence or fear. Adrian's work with law enforcement had reformed policies around gang reformation. His partnership with the justice system had created models that other cities had begun to adopt. His belief that people could change, that redemption was possible, had been institutionalized in ways that would outlast him. And his family, his 4 beautiful children, his extraordinary wife, they represented something that his father would never have believed was possible. A man from the criminal underworld, building a life on the foundation of love and integrity. The greatest revenge against those who try to destroy you isn't violence or retaliation. It's this: living well. Living fully. Building something beautiful. creating a life so meaningful and powerful that the people who tried to destroy you become footnotes in the story of your triumph. They reached the front door of the mansion, and immediately they were surrounded by chaos. Grace, their oldest at 15, wanted to talk about college applications. She was thinking about international business, like her mother. She wanted to study in Lagos, in Nigeria, in the country where her mother's family was from. David, at 13, was in the middle of some elaborate story about his soccer game and how he'd almost scored but the goalkeeper had made an impossible save. Their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was showing them a drawing she'd made in school. A family portrait, with all 6 of them standing together, holding hands, with a big sun shining above them. And their 5-year-old son, James, was demanding that Adrian pick him up immediately because he'd missed his dad. Adrian scooped James up and set him on his shoulders. Sophia smoothed Lily's hair and asked her about school. They moved through the mansion toward the dining room, where dinner was being prepared, and they were a family. Simply and beautifully a family. Vincent Wu was already there, waiting at the table. He'd become something more than Adrian's business partner or even his brother-in-arms. He was Uncle Vincent to all 4 children. He was family in every sense of the word that mattered. Elena, Sophia's best friend from university, was there too, with her own children. She and Vincent had gotten married 3 years ago, and now their kids played with Adrian and Sophia's kids. The next generation of connections, of bonds that transcended the old divisions of class and circumstance. As they sat around the dinner table, the table that had become the heart of Adrian and Sophia's home, Adrian felt a piece of peace settle into his chest. This was what it meant to truly live. Not the power. Not the fear. Not the empire built on violence or the status that came from being untouchable. This table. These people. This love. This family. This life built deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of what it cost and what it was worth. Adrian looked at Sophia across the table, and she smiled at him, a knowing smile, a smile that said she understood exactly what he was thinking. They'd built this together. Every brick, every foundation, every moment of joy and struggle and growth. They'd built it together. They'd chosen each other. Every single day for 10 years, they'd chosen each other. Through the trial, through the business transformation, through the birth of each child, through the challenges and the victories and the ordinary moments that made up a life. They'd chosen love over fear. They'd chosen building over destroying. They'd chosen to become better versions of themselves, every single day. Grace asked her father if he was thinking about something serious. Adrian smiled and told her he was thinking about how lucky he was. How grateful he was to have this family, this woman, this life. Sophia reached under the table and squeezed his hand. A quiet acknowledgement. A reminder that they were in this together. That whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Adrian and Sophia sat on the couch in the study, the same study where Adrian had first asked Sophia to stay, not as a maid, but as herself. "Do you think we did it?" Sophia asked quietly. "Do you think we built what we set out to build?" Adrian thought about the question carefully. "We built something," he said finally. "Something real. Something meaningful. Something that honors both our pasts and creates something new. I think that's more than what we set out to build." Sophia leaned her head on Adrian's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of you." "Our mother would be proud of us," Adrian corrected. "This isn't my journey alone, Sophia. It's ours. Your courage made all of this possible." They sat in silence, watching the Seoul skyline glitter through the windows of the study. The same skyline they'd looked out at 10 years ago when their story was just beginning. Adrian and Sophia's story began with 2 whispered words, "Be quiet." But it became so much more than that. It became a testament to the power of choosing what's right over what's easy. Of choosing love over fear. Of choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. It became a story about redemption, not just Adrian's redemption from his past, but Sophia's redemption from invisibility. Both of them, together, becoming the best versions of themselves. It became a story about how love isn't just romantic. It's choosing someone. It's trusting someone. It's building with someone. It's showing up, every single day, and choosing them again and again. Beautiful souls, if you've made it this far, if you've walked with Adrian and Sophia through all 10 chapters of their journey, I want to thank you. Thank you for believing in their story. Thank you for understanding that the greatest love stories aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones that find us in the darkness. The ones that require courage. The ones that change everything. Adrian and Sophia's story started as a crisis. A betrayal. A moment of danger that could have ended in tragedy. But what it became was this, a testament to the power of moral courage. A reminder that one person's willingness to speak up can change another person's entire life. A celebration of love that transcends class, culture, and circumstance. This is what love really looks like. Not the fairy tale. Not the fantasy. But the real thing. The messy, complicated, beautiful reality of two people choosing each other, every single day, no matter what. They're building a legacy now. Not through power or fear, but through love and integrity. They're raising children who will know what it means to do what's right. They're creating opportunities for others to transform their lives, just as they transformed their own. And it all started with 2 whispered words, be quiet. But Sophia didn't stay quiet. She spoke up. She risked everything. She saved Adrian's life. And Adrian, instead of responding with violence, chose to listen. He chose justice. He chose to become better. That's the real story here. That's what will stay with you long after you finish watching this video. Remember, sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person we overlook is the person who saves us. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage from one person to change everything. Stay blessed, stay loved, beautiful souls. And remember, you have the power to change your story, just like Adrian and Sophia changed theirs.